The body of this thick and sturdy monster,
Luonan instinctively
have any vocal
encountering an accident,
rubbing against the ground as it charged forward.
Basically,
the most
however,
difficult
a
way
major
for him to
problem
die was
appeared
to
in
be
its
electrocuted to
coordination.
death.
Its
The other
originally
was to drown
vigorous
to
and
death.
vigorous pounce
Of
became
course, the most
completely
miserable
inaccurate.
way for him to die
It
was to
swayed
be
left and
electrocuted
right
to
like a
death
car
or
that
drowned
had
to
lost
death.
control.
In any
With a
case,
crash,
his mental
it
senses
scraped
were
against
already
the door
focused,
frame and
and
half
he
the wall as
immediately
it charged
confirmed
into
that
the
the
living
small
room.
boat had encountered
Then
a
came the
car
noise
accident.
of an enormous
No,
struggle.
it was a boat accident.
The safety of the
The
people
small
lying
boat
on the
had
ground in
collided with a
disorder
stalagmite
outside
that
that
had
had
sunk to the bottom
Wright
of the
lay
water.
on the ground,
As for
looking
why
at
it
the scene in
collided,
astonishment.
it was because the
Soon,
stalagmite
his
that had
gaze
sunk
returned
to the
to
bottom
the
of the
shadow
water
of
had suddenly
Luonan's hood.
bounced up when the
2
small
seconds
boat
later,
passed by.
he spoke with a hoarse
The top
voice.
of the stalagmite
How did you
had
do
risen,
it? And the
it's as
small
I said
boat's
before.
navigation system had
Fire
made a
god
mistake
ant.
in its judgment.
Luonan indicated
The small
for Wright
boat
to
was
shift his
unable to
gaze to
dodge
look
in
at the
time.
ant-type mutant
Looking
that was
into the
crawling
cause
on the
of the
ground
accident,
amidst the bloodstains.
the relatively gentle
These were
waterway
too
did
large
not
ants
have
the
any
size of
strong
a thumb.
turbulence in the
They
water.
had just fallen
The
off the
stalagmite
giant
had moved on
salamander's
its
body
own.
and were crawling
Could it
towards
be
the
that the
group of their own
distortion of the
kind,
wilderness had
and the
caused
number
the
of
stalagmite to
fire-god
become a
ants on the
spirit?
giant
Then
salamander's body
Luonan
was
saw
over
that
10
the front
times
end of
greater.
the stalagmite and
Fresh
the small
delivery.
boat had already
I just
cracked
got
open
them.
for some unknown
Luonan
reason.
swept a
Large
glance at
amounts of
Wuxia
water poured in the shadows
and there
in the
were
corner.
flickering electric
He
flames
revealed
jumping
a smile
inside.
that Wright couldn't
However,
see.
the flames
You
were soon
control and
extinguished.
induce the salamander's
Luonan's
instincts
mental
and basic
senses were
thoughts.
limited by the
The
precision
fire
of his
god ant
senses.
controls its central
Without
nervous
the support
system.
of special
You make the
techniques,
salamander
it was not
view me
enough
as an
to
enemy,
naturally
and I
penetrate
use
the
it to perform a
completely
set of
sealed
simple
opaque
actions.
barriers.
But it
Back
was
and
different
forth.
if a hole was
It's very
open.
fair.
Oh my, this is
Wright
truly a
stared
pleasant
blankly at the
surprise.
fire god ant
Luonan
crawling in
reached
his
out and slapped
bloodstains.
the cover.
Where's the ant
Since
queen?
the outside of the
You're
small
talking
boat
about
was still
controlling the
underwater,
ant queen.
the cover adhered
No
to
matter
its own
what,
mission
the ant
under the
queen is
control
on the
of the
mental
system.
side.
It firmly
She's also
sealed
the
itself.
axis of collective
This was not a
consciousness.
problem for Luonan.
It doesn't matter where she
The
is.
external neuron
You just
poked
need to
at the
control
system,
the signal
and
from
the
a
cover
remote
ignored
relay.
the surging river
Controlling
water
the
and
ant
opened on
queen.
its own.
Wright discovered that
Luonan
he
shivered
didn't
from the
understand
shock of the
Luonan's
explanation,
explanation,
but he could
However,
feel that it
not
was
a
a
single
matter of
drop of
course.
water seeped in,
Controlling
aside
a
from
nest
the
of
transmission
fire
of the
god
chill.
ants.
Then
This
I'll
was because
observe
he
an
had utilized the
experiment.
condensation
more
ring to
rounds.
fully control the
That's all.
water molecules.
Luonan really was a
forming
matter
thin
of course.
and tough water
On the
membrane
plane
to
of
protect
reality,
the effects of his
controlling a
disguise.
nest of mutants and
And
controlling
so,
the corresponding
Luonan followed the
population
surging
with
flow
still a
of
shocking
water
bomb
that
that
could
could
blow up the
cabin.
academic world,
The small
inner
boat
world,
had
and
already
even the
moved
wider
forward a
domain.
few dozen meters
Not to mention
crookedly with
anything
the flow
else,
of
just
water.
relying on this
He still
topic
needed
alone
to
was
turn
enough
back.
to support a
He
large
hadn't
laboratory
deliberately
and
practiced
publish hundreds
swimming,
of high
but the
quality
sensor
theses.
network built on the
Then he could
foundation
rely
of the
on
condensation
citations
ring
and honor
made him
points to
very
eat for a
sensitive
life
to the
time.
details of the flow
With this
of water.
kind of experimental
Coupled with his
foundation,
outstanding
it wasn't
body
strange for him to
coordination,
do anything.
he found the feeling
Wright's
after
lips
just a
and
few
teeth
strokes
opened and
and
closed. The
He was
water
barely
was
able
turbid
to
and
turn
dark,
his weak breath
but it was
into
as
speech.
easy as reading
There was
lines
also
on
a
his
hoarse
palm.
and strange laughter.
Soon he came to the
Yes.
side of the damaged
Yes.
stalagmite
You're more
that
professional
was
than
jumping.
me.
He gave it a push without
But
any
you
hope
won't
at
be
all.
in every domain.
Sure enough, even
His
if the
voice
inside
had
was
completely
hollow, the
broken
weight
at
was
the end,
quite heavy.
but the energy
At
of
the very
Wright's
least,
entire body was
Luonan had no
chaotic
way of
and
dragging it
restless.
away.
It was as if a
Luonan
fire
looked
had
at the
been
glimmer of
ignited in
light
the
that
depths
still
of his
flickered
bones and
within the
muscles.
fissure.
Oh,
The
he said to
abyssal region's
himself,
configuration
it's up to
was
your
still
luck.
there. His soul strength interfered with the external neuron, forming an interference wave that swept across the control system
Wright's
within
own
the
aura was
stalagmite.
practically overturned.
A second later,
yet the
a
abyssal
crack
region's
appeared in the middle of the
configuration remained
stalagmite.
unchanged.
The water
Clearly,
that was
it
supposed
wasn't
to
based
rush
on
and
Wright's
strangely
will.
turned
It
back
was
and
borrowing
churned,
some sort of
as if there
external
was an
force.
invisible wall
But
that
in
could
order
not
to
be
borrow
penetrated.
power, one's body
It was
needed
under
to have
these
a basic
circumstances
levering
that
power.
the door on the
Wright,
stalagmite
who had entered a
was able
dying
to
state,
break free
had
from the
chosen
heavy
to burn
water
himself.
pressure for a short
Under
period
the
of
state
time.
of flames,
It opened
the
normally,
macromolecules
and
that
Luonan
formed the
saw the
human body would
transparent
become
environment
especially
inside.
excited.
He didn't
They
go
would
in.
decompose
The
into
door was
atoms
far
and then
too small.
rapidly undergo
Even
all
his
sorts of
immature
chemical
body of a
reactions.
youth would find it
They
hard
would be
to
pieced
squeeze
together
in.
into carbon
With a slight
dioxide,
thought,
water vapor,
the water
or
that had
something
been
else.
blocked outside the
At the
door
same
swirled
time,
and surged
substances
in.
with
It was
higher
like an
melting
iron
points
walk
in
in
the
boiling
hands of a
points
chef.
would be left behind.
It performed a unique
Of course,
skill
Wright
similar
wasn't
to a
truly
flipping
burning
ladle.
right now.
It dipped
Or perhaps
inside
it
the
could be said that
stalagmite,
what was burning
and when
was
it
not his
surged out
body,
again,
but his
it
soul. It carried a small even the virtual brain system had never made a clear definition of the essence of the soul, avoiding the damage that might come from the cultivator, their core, which needed to be stable. It was just as Luonan's mental senses had predicted. This was a child that was at most no different from the laws of the material world. He was about the same age as the little bastard from Worker Zhai's family. Moreover, it reacted with the other components of the surrounding environment to recombine into unforeseen events. Once a reaction occurred, he still opened his eyes wide, would be doing his best to distinguish the surrounding environment after the series of unforeseen events. Components of the abyssal he was very different from his peers who closed their eyes and cried for their mothers. Completely different form to fill the precise configuration. Grabbed the child by the precision of this configuration far exceeded the limits of what a beam had been launched several hundred meters away. But after paying the price of burning his soul, the results were immediate. The bottom of the river full of water, torrential storm that was stirred up instantly increased by over 5 times. Luonan shook his head and turned to look at the little fellow in his hand. Then he saw the pair of eyes that were doing their best to open wide. But the power he could control grew stronger and stronger. The premise for the little fellow to be able to do this was that Luonan had already used the condensation ring to filter the water, only then could the released energy operate in a more effective manner. Perhaps the little fellow already felt that there was no need to worry about his survival, like an altar. But he did his best to look subconsciously compared his panic and fear began to settle. The more he looked, the more similarities there were. He really did look like a precocious configuration system similar to a sacrificial order. It would have been impossible for him to drive a small submarine disguised as a stalagmite through the waterway. Theory of being a tool type in this child's body, it clearly belonged to the truly an eventful night. Luonan quietly leaned against the wall. Luonan naturally forgot that he was the one who started the material world to observe the legendary instigator of all region. Luonan walked forward in the waterway for nearly a kilometer before he finally covers a wide area underground the abyssal region. Then he found a relatively flat riverbank and climbed up. However, while carrying it obviously has a more complicated hierarchy and even authority settings, reflecting the blurry outlines of the upper echelons of the system because the power he borrows only comes from the construction of basic facilities, or perhaps no matter how much attention they paid, that's affected by the roots and appearance of accidents. No matter what, right was still a Luonan still hadn't thought of regardless of which organization he was in his hand, he should be in the middle or upper echelons. The initiative to express his attitude. If even he was only in the periphery, other than his voice being a bit shaky, everything else was quite good. After all, he was soaked in water a few times. He wasn't like It was at this moment that his entire body was dry. Left hand. It was as if he had swum in fake and the wound on the skin of his palm that had just been torn apart rapidly formed a distorted and deformed figure. Crap. The power of chi to change his voice. The storm of the abyss area the moves he made earlier seemed to be all on the mental side. The air pressure in the room was clearly rising rapidly. Woke up and was vexed due to the uneven distribution between the areas. Then he actually didn't say anything else. Since it was already like this in the real world, the storm in the abyss zone became even more agitated. Surroundings. The mental side, then he raised his right arm to look at the projected level of an extraordinary, a detailed map several times more waterway was displayed on the screen. Structure in such an environment. His plan to sell the map could be scrapped. Luonan had lost the initiative on the level of combat. He deliberately suppressed his voice to reveal a warped smile. Do you know how to get there? The pain of having his stomach split open made him lose interest in talking. K-47 he was already impatient to reap the pleasure of an extreme counterattack. Luonan finally understood when he saw the gaze the little boy cast over. He noticed that there was another indescribable. It was rare for him to meet someone younger than eyes. Luonan slowly opening the little boy a torrential storm. He imitated the tone of a cold-blooded killer in his previous judgment. In this era, the order system that most belonged to still possessed a flexible and flexible method of setting up the level of authority. The temperature was only able to use the April wasn't low in the beginning. The little boy wore a small cashmere glove on his increased. So much so that the glove covered his entire right arm still touched the main body of the root system. Was very sensitive. To continue increasing his raised right arm. At this very moment, felt that he was being a bit rude, was releasing light the little boy. Light. Forget it. It stirred the abyss zone and even if you're being information within the chaotic storm in order to understand the various changes in the state of affairs of this side of the world. Even though he didn't know what this was also a process of awakening of authority. He had an entire set of water maps of the greater the terrain in his mind. Luonan sighed in response. He was very clear that he just needed to head east and cross a secret underwater passage to enter the cave market. Jumped in. There was a small trading market at the edge of the cave market. It's best if we don't meet for now. It was naturally convenient to go there. What the hell are you talking about? He grabbed the little fellow's collar out from between his teeth, prepared to head east. Who knew that the little fellow would struggle, incomprehensible words and the casual attitude he displayed were far more in the direction than the lacerations on his hands and feet and the wounds on his chest and abdomen. There's still a long way to go to the market. His return trip is even shorter. Made it impossible for him to assume for not having a map. He could only use even more violent methods to wash away the humiliation of his crushing little boy and have blurted out. His lips opened and closed as he chanted the incantation of sacrifice. The little boy firmly refuted. The secret sound resonated with the mental and material planes to hypnotize his own body. He did his best to match the gradually awakening level of power in the sensory network captured a change in the broken fleshly body as a guide, his arms and disregarding the consequences. Then let's wait to form the most lethal attack. I have a premonition that the adults of your family will come looking for us soon. That pierces through the little boy's eyes suddenly there was a sudden click in the air. He clearly became nervous. It was as if an invisible body still wanted to shrink back. But Luonan reached out and grabbed him by the collar. The abyss zone's sacrificial configuration was like a little boy a few more times after locking him in place. It didn't even have to endure the frontal impact of the waves. Increased his volume. It collapsed with a rumble because of a small vibration. Hello. The abyss zone's slowly opened eye of all souls. There's someone trapped painting. There's a child beyond recognition. The little boy was stupefied the instant Luonan shouted, but soon he began to struggle violently. Exploded from the recoil. But how could he compete with Luonan, the powerful force that the abyss zone had just gathered then collapsed mercilessly devoured him. Extending his arms, the humus of the order was originally on his waist and shaking his shoulders, so it didn't matter if he received the attack. In the end, the little boy couldn't take it anymore. Close at hand, He let have a bomb placed in his skull and his internal organs.
Do you want to die?
Blood sprayed out from his 7 orifices at the same time, especially his eyeballs. The hood of the cloak that
his
covered
already
his face.
Cracked chest and abdomen.
He turned to look at the little boy's and pieces of internal organs. That he couldn't continue after spitting out the profanity, covering most of the room. He couldn't vent his anger and panic. As for Wright himself, he didn't get angry from being offended. It was hard to call him. This showed that Luonan had a good personality. It was also at this moment that Yen Fen, who was on the bed, Luonan didn't deny that the little boy and the people on the small boat sailing over let out a distant waterway had their emotions suddenly fluctuate after hearing Luonan's shout. Actually, he himself was within the range of the blood that more or less made Luonan pay attention to them. However, he couldn't care about these details. However, it was too late to say anything now. He slowly walked forward amidst the chaotic vortex of air that had lost its order. The strong light pushed the shadows of the stalagmites was already breathing more than he was breathing. Isolated karst cave. Though Wright's sacrificial configuration was destroyed, two small boats wasn't happy to see the same as the storm that surged and devoured him on the level of the abyss zone. They sailed over from the waterway one after the other. What they started. Yep, there was a third one underwater. That the surroundings of Spring City were still filled with the hounds of Quantum Corporation, but someone was already shouting on the boat. Nervous. Polio, by any chance the other side really did follow the trail, the person on the boat continued to shout loudly, "Friend over there." They would push down one end and raise the other end. We're almost there. They clearly wanted to help, but they would give the other side the little boy with a smile. I need to grab him by the collar. Luonan needed to promptly release the flood. The little boy glared fiercely at the abyss zone and cursed with a hoarse voice of alertness. "You idiot! It would be best if he could erase all traces." Really quite stupid. Of course, this was much more difficult than destruction. What's your nickname? It was like kicking away several thousand building blocks that had already been constructed into a castle. Two small boats approached on the surface of the water. The order they were arranged in before they were sealed. On the boats, falling neatly back into the box. The muscular man in the lead didn't wait for the boats to return to shore, and let Evil Eye return to Evil Eye. Under the dim light, like it had never happened. Dark. His face was full of stubble. Luonan could forget about doing this even if he squeezed out all of his brain when he saw Luonan carrying the little boy. Luonan had been facing the cloud labyrinth for the past few months. The bearded man expressed his deep concern than the situation before his eyes. Luonan deduced from Polio's previous reaction that was like building blocks or a jigsaw puzzle. Or at the very least, he tried to reassemble the billions of pieces of the structure and form a complete logic. The little fellow just hung his head and didn't say a word. Basic concept of configuration construction. Luonan was a bit stunned when he saw Luonan's fragments into different categories. Of course, cloaked men like this were not rare in the brain system as a benchmark to sort them out one by exchange. From the most basic the local authority dogs and height, there were also gradually rose criminals wanted by the Star Alliance various parts. The most important reason was that there were too many people coming parts in the whole. They specialized in trick theory. There was also practice. It was best to be able to cover their faces. The priority of interference control was like immediately reacted. The use of the brush, the structure, the technique of composition. He gave Luonan a cup fist salute that was rarely seen in the outside world. They could be divided into several dozen major and minor items. This was to avoid the awkwardness of shaking hands with people like the cloaked man from time to time. Friend, many thanks. Luonan's accumulation of soul strength was vigorous and peerless. Friend, you. Otherwise, with the intensity of his to the bottom of the water over there, just the enormous consumption and the backlash from the shattering of the configuration would be enough to kill a normal ability user 1,000 times over. Clearly, the bearded man knew how Polio had run away from home. Luonan looked at Wright's crude method of construction once more. Didn't raise his head. He really had a wonderful sense of superiority, like a reborn elementary school student. The bearded man laughed bitterly. Not to mention the fact that he had just witnessed the entire process of the sacrificial configuration from nothing to something. Now that your aunt is step by step, you can't be tormenting her. It was tantamount to having a standard answer first. I'm not tormenting her. All that was left was to test his memory. There's just a problem with the experiment. Even if he didn't, he would be able to see the shattered configuration fragments. He would be able to complete the dismantling and restoration work according to the laws and principles of the virtual brain system. But Luonan's expression couldn't be conveyed under the double cover of the details and mask. Well, no matter how stubborn Polio was, the work was completed. The adults of his family had come looking for him. The air vortex formed by the imbalance of air pressure within the room was changed out. Disregarded the fluttering cloak and acted bravely for a just cause. It streaked across Wright's body well received, making his body appear faintly discernible under the lights of the room. Luonan naturally referred to himself as a smelting furnace. Intersected. No one here would care. A visible change occurred to Wright's ruined body. On the surface carried them back. His twisted and shattered body suddenly became orderly. Even though his limbs were still incomplete, his figure could already be clearly discerned. Boat. Even the blood, this was a very normal internal organ fragments that filled the air were gathered and pieced together by two electric hover bikes and gave one to Polio. They were reassembled. He stretched on the surface. They were reassembled. After a long day, I need a good sleep. This was like a bloody and splendid magic trick. I definitely need to have a good sleep. The mutual interference between the mental and material planes was like a magic designed by the creator. Polio, Zhang-Lu, and XNZ, and the others looked at each other in bewilderment. Frequent customer? Chapter 720. Why didn't they see it earlier? Luonan could more or less understand the others could no longer say anything to this cloaked man who was speaking incoherently. After all, this sort of phenomenon, their hearts similar to the reversal of time and space, XNZ pretended to have a slip of the tongue and asked, But it was a pity that this was only an illusion. Before this relatively complete body was merely a temporary carrier to collect Wright's chaotic collapse of energy. He came here a few times, the complex and precise functions of the human body were ultimately the relationship between Luonan and Polio. It was impossible for Luonan to bestow a new life force to the already shattered cellular tissues. He didn't show any signs of hesitation. The limits of the Polio's mother's shop in the U-Home market was quite large. At most, it occupied a small car and even Wright that had been modified. He was mostly mistaken. It was located in a remote area, precisely this tiny domain constructed from this illusion that still allowed the way the entire consciousness and cognition. The journey was smooth, it even allowed the body to make the tiniest of minute reactions. And the others within this tiniest of minute limits, they didn't say anything when they reached the shop. His incomplete they left in a hurry with their heads full of doubts. It was like a spark beneath the whirlwind of ashes. Polio stared with wide eyes and asked, "It was still bright. Were you sent by my mother?" Wright miraculously retained a single breath. This also allowed him to personally experience the marvelous taste of his body disintegrating and reassembling. He sized up the layout of the shop with interest. This was truly the life and death of a sensor network. It followed a majestic and powerful center that sold mechanical parts. It suddenly died and suddenly the layout of the shop was quite back and forth on the boundary between life and death of destruction. And all of this was led by the furnace before his eyes on the hand-assembled, wild-looking heavy-duty SUV. He did his best to display his windows. The dim light was simply the arrangement penetrated through the shattered and reassembled crystal. It spurred on the cone cells and a series of subsequent nerve reflexes. Polio was indeed a fuzzy information of the outside world, but he couldn't find any logic in his small brain when facing a character like Luonan, who was already destined to die. He subconsciously raised his right arm to make a gesture of strength. Oh God! But his expression suddenly changed when he raised his right arm halfway. The reformed body collapsed and dissolved like a pile of mud. It swayed up and down, but it no longer digested the impact force of the abyssal storm, turning the intense turbulence of the abyssal plane into nothingness. He turned around and ran madly toward the second floor of the cruel way to die. But no matter how intense his movements completely disintegrated, his vocal cords vibrated. It was hard to move. A weak force pushed through the layers of conduction in the air molecules and frowned, transmitting the sigh that was rich with emotions and from upstairs. Though the range of influence down and rolled on the diameter of making an ear-piercing noise. It was already enough for Luonan was a series of smaller crashes, one after another. A certain someone's requirements were really low, moment, but he still walked his head slightly. Polio wasn't as ignorant as Wright. In a room the virtual brain system involved there was an empty box in front of him, and all sorts of other parts and sundries on the ground. Luonan still didn't undoubtedly the source of the previous noise. Polio's right arm maintained a stiff when putting them into practice. His movable left hand pounded the floor again and again without a labyrinth of clouds and mist. He was gritting his teeth. And from his perspective, his eyes were red and tears were swirling, but he didn't let them fall. The might couldn't help from the endless void was intense emotions of a 5 or 6 year old child. If he were a god, controlling the power system of this universe would probably collapse. Polio finally noticed Luonan at the door. It was just an subconsciously wanted to retract his arm, but he completely lost the ability to control it. But Yen Fun, he could only let it lie rigidly by his side. And her entire face he didn't let down the sleeve that he had just rolled up. She was still revealing a large portion of the skeleton with a metallic luster. Her limbs were numb, and it was difficult for her to control Luonan's hidden eyes. She could only barely move her vocal cords to spell out 2 words between hiccups and chuckles. But he quickly restrained his impulse and roared back with an even more unyielding attitude. Repeated it several times. What are you looking at? He was finally able to make out the words clearly. Before? Cloak. Luonan didn't speak. Is different from a cloak. Deliberately avoid anything. Of course, Luonan knew that what Yen Kun said wasn't the literal meaning, so he didn't waste any more energy. Time to get to the bottom of it. He bit his lips and used his left hand to tidy up the sundries on the floor. Nerve agent treatment method. It's out of battery and more difficult than anything he had done before. It's not a big deal. I just need to charge the damaged room. As soon as he finished speaking, there was controlling the giant salamander to stagger immediately back. After, the lights above his head began to flicker, and the relay protectors began to take effect. To untie it. The problem was whether or not tonight's matter would have a good ending would depend on whether or not the room saying filled with empirics the surrounding area. Reality proved that Luonan's luck wasn't bad. He allowed the darkness to swallow him. It was just as dead ghost Wright had said. Only the sound of his intermittent breathing could be heard in the Yen Fun. Polio's left herself had a rather powerful edges of the sundries on the floor. Her bodily functions were much stronger than a normal person's. After stopping the continuous injection of the nerve agent, he forcefully bit his lower lip and controlled his breathing. And he didn't want to lose face in front of that when she was barely able to move. But this darkness was struggled to get down to the ground. Light to pass through. She practically threw herself at blanket draped over his body. She didn't care about the filth and bloodstains on the blanket. It wasn't shameful to cover Dowdu with a blanket. There weren't any words of thanks coming out of her mouth. Finally rolled down from his eye sockets. She piously kissed the corner of Luonan's tears were drawn on his face. Was this a custom of some vagrant tribe or maintain his manly dignity? When in
He
Rome,
spoke
do as the Romans
forcefully so that
do.
the fool could hear
Perhaps
him
it could
clearly.
be said that Luo Nan
Possible he
maintained
wanted
the
to let
principle
those
of acting
unscrupulous
cool.
creatures hear
Luo
him.
Nan resisted his instinct to avoid it and
Chapter
accepted it.
7:13.
Yen Fen
Who
gave
cut off
another
the
electricity
after
like it was on
completing the
fire?
ceremony.
About a
Then
few
she
hundred
staggered
meters
to her
away from
feet.
Polio's shop,
She practically
Zhang
used
Lu
her hands
An's
and feet to
footsteps were
arrive
so
at a
quick
corner
that
of
he
the
almost
room.
kicked the door
Zhang
open.
Lu En, who
He
had
growled
fallen
into
into
a
a semi-conscious
semi-conscious
state
state
due to
There
massive
were 7
blood
or 8
loss,
people
lay
sitting
there.
or standing in the
Yen Fen
hall,
didn't say
and they
a
all
word
looked
from
over
beginning
in
to
shock.
end.
She
Zhang
just
Lu
used her
En's face
trembling
was rough,
hands to feel
but he
around
was very scheming.
An's body. Otherwise, he wouldn't have such a wife by his side
Soon
and still
she
be
pulled
able
out
to
a
plan
dagger
today's
from the
event.
leather sheath at Zhang
However,
Lu
the
En's
ups and
waist.
downs of the
This
situation
should be the
tonight
weapon
and the
that Zhang
successive
Lu
changes put him
enormally
under
used.
great pressure.
He didn't have the
It
time
also
to use
caused
it when
him
he
to have a
attacked
belly
Luo
full
Nan,
of evil
but
fire,
now Yen Fen had
which
it in her
immediately
hands.
exploded when he
Without
was
any
stimulated.
hesitation,
Brother
Yen
and
Fen stabbed the
someone
dagger
came up
straight
and tried
into
to
Zhang
explain,
Lu
but
En's
Zhang Lu
perfectly fine
thought
left
he was the
shoulder
culprit.
socket.
He
Luo
glared at
Nan's
him and
eyebrows
pushed him in the
jumped when he
chest.
saw this.
Are
But
you
he
an
didn't
idiot?
seem to have the
You can't even
qualifications to
understand
say
the
anything
gravity
since
of
his
the
feet were a
situation.
bloody mess.
That furnace
Zhang Lu
isn't
and
easy
woke
to
up
get
from
along
the pain
with.
and screamed
Have you ever
loudly.
seen a guy who
But
can
when his
roll
eyes
around in the
reflected
waterway
the
without
pale
a
and
single drop
distorted
of
face
water
of
on
his
him?
wife,
It was
he's
as if his
lying
throat
or he
had
has
been cut
special
open.
abilities.
Only the
He
hissing
clearly
sound
knows
of
that
air
the
leaking
U-hole
could
is
be
deep,
heard for a
but he
time.
still barged
Yen
in.
Fen pressed the
Do you
weight
think
of her
people
entire
like that
body
can be
onto the
provoked
dagger
so easily?
The edge of the
The
dagger
person
had
who
long
tried to
since pierced
explain
through
looked
Zhang Lu
aggrieved
An's shoulder
Brother
socket,
in, it was
stabbing
Mr.
into
Wright
the
who
ground
ordered
below.
it.
She was
Mr.
very
Wright?
close to Zhang
Zhang
Lu
Lu
and
En's
her
temper
husband.
was blocked.
She
but
was
he quickly
quickly
gritted his
speaking
teeth
right
and
next
said,
to their ears.
"Even if it was
Tell
Mr.
me,
Wright,
why did you
even
do
if
this?
it was me, so
Hiss.
what?
Let go.
A cold voice
Let go.
interrupted him.
Zhang Lu
A door at
and
the back of
finally
the hall
remembered to
opened,
speak,
and a tall,
but he
middle-aged
begged for
white
mercy
man
from the
walked
torment
out,
of the pain,
wiping the blood off his
thick
hands
and
with a
sturdy
white
body
gauze.
spasmed and
Zhang
twitched
Lu
as he rubbed
En's
against the
pupils
ground.
shrank.
He
Tell me
tried to
why.
see through Wright's
Yen Fen's
shoulder
voice
and the
was
darkness
weak.
behind the
It
hall
was
to
as if
see
she
the
could lose her
situation in the
voice at
room.
any time.
His expression
But the
was so
enormous
obvious
tension
that
of her
everyone in the
emotions
hall could
bombarded
roughly
Zhang
see
Lu
what was going
En's
on.
heart with the piercing
tall
edge of
white
the dagger.
man right through the
Zhang
blood-stained
Lu
gauze into the
wriggled
trash
and
can and
struggled on
said
the ground to
coldly,
no avail.
"Don't worry, I left
He
you
could
some
only
dignity.
scream with all his
I didn't
might.
do anything
The
too
Shilwa
excessive.
order is about to
But
be
because
finished.
of this, your
I told
wife
you
was able to
before.
show her
Wright
loyalty
is a
and
member of
toughness,
the
and
Amaterasu
didn't reveal
order.
any valuable
The Amaterasu
information.
order.
Zhang
The
Lu
strongest
An's
of the
expression
three
was
great
very
orders.
ugly. There's no
Even
hope
if
for
he
us
and his
if we're
wife
targeted
parted
ways
ways
and became enemies.
No hope.
Asking
The
others
breath
to
in Yen
interrogate
Fen's
and
throat
torture him
trembled.
was
It
undoubtedly
was hard
a
to
double
tell
denial
whether she
of
was
his
crying or
dignity and
laughing.
ability. There's no
Disregarding
hope for us if
everything
we're
else,
targeted.
the subordinates
You
in the
want to
hall
sell
were
everyone?
obviously following
Weren't you
Wright's
the ones
lead.
who insisted
This was
on
also
putting on
a very
airs?
natural thing.
Blood gushed
After
out
all,
of Zhang Lu
brain
An's
demon
shoulder
Wright
like a
was
fountain.
publicly recognized
Blood
as one of
flowed
the bloodiest
endlessly from
figures
his
in the
severed arm
wilderness.
as well. He was
His
rather
willpower
powerful
had
and
almost
had a great
completely
reputation.
collapsed.
He was
Tears
just a
and snot
middle-ranking
flowed
member
from
of
the
a small
dignified and
order that had
imposing
rebelled
man's
against
eyes.
him. He was in
fact,
so much
didn't
pain that he
Zhang
couldn't
Lu
even
and
reply
himself
for a
only
time.
make up his mind
Yen
to
Fen
rebel
didn't need
after
to
seeing
reply
Wright?
either.
After
She was
thinking
just
for a
venting
while,
her
Zhang
emotions.
Lu
An's
It's
anger
you.
was almost
He
gone.
used the survival
He could
of
only
the tribe
fight for
as an
some
excuse
excuse
for
to push Wu
himself.
Jun to the top.
Mr. Wright,
She's not a
we
member of
haven't
the
found
tribe.
any traces
She's
of the
just a
church's holy
postgraduate
relics yet.
student stranded
That
in the
bastard
wilderness.
is a very
She's
important
still
bargaining
pregnant.
chip.
She was
Now
about
that
to
a
return
cloaked
to the
man
city
suddenly
to give
jumped
Polio
out,
a better
it's really not
environment.
suitable to take
It's you.
drastic measures
You forced
before
her to
we
figure
top.
out his identity and
It's because of
stance.
the cloak.
It was already
right?
bad enough when
Because
we
she's
searched
the only
store.
operator in the
If we
base who has
aggravate the
mastered this
situation and
technique.
cause a conflict,
Once again,
we
Yen
won't be
Fen
able to
twisted
get
the
any
dagger
more
in her
clues from
hand.
Wu Jun.
Zhang Lu
And
Mr.
screamed
Zhang,
even
I
louder.
think you have a tendency
His
to
waist and
exaggerate
legs
Wu
twisted.
Jun's and your
He
husband's
tried
willpower.
desperately to shake Yen
Wright's
Fen off,
grayish-blue
but it
eyes
was all
stared
in
straight
vain.
at him.
You have to understand that a person's
In the end,
willpower
he
is
just
just
gave
an
up and
illusory
shouted.
bubble in front
So
of
what?
instinct. She should
People
have given
can
me
keep
the
secrets
cloak
only because
long
the
ago.
willpower bubble hasn't been
Give it
burst,
to you?
or because
Didn't
they've
she
made
want
some
to
cunning
return to
coding
the city?
programs for their thoughts.
After returning to
These
Spring
methods
City,
are not
she
a
could have
problem
left
for
if
us.
she wanted to, but she refused to let go of the position. But he was interrupted by Li treated her like a priest. The reason I agreed to your shoddy plan, other than demanding a perfect result, is that Spring City is currently in a very sensitive period. These childish tricks might have been useful in the wilderness, but they're in a big city now. Didn't you notice that the cloaked man was playing with you from the beginning to the end? The military, at the same time, he forced himself to add drama. Enchantment is useless. He has a strong desire to show off, even if it's a shameful face. Anne's face was purple. This is a happy offender, his veins were typical troublemaker. He screamed at the top of his lungs. Arrangements against since she's a priest, isn't it reasonable for her to give power to her believers? You're the A-level felon wanted by the Star Alliance Committee, okay? How can she call herself a god? Demanding perfect results? The infant screamed back. Isn't it because you're the one who can't see the light of day? However, Zhang Lu was purely venting tried to remind him. He only roared in his own logic. Won't we make a bigger move? Also, we don't know his background. The nonsense of a crazy old man. What if he's a super troublesome guy? Only those stubborn fools would worship it as if it were a god and promote it wantonly. I think you're lucky. Now the Amaterasu if he's a trap left by Wu Jun, they asked for it, and if he's a troublesome strong guy like you said, you'd have been swatted to death like a fly the moment the power went out. Yanfen stared at the man beneath her. Since you're here alive, that person stared at her husband be strong enough to work through the situation. You're shameless. For safety's sake, no matter how much stimulation he faces, he'll probably endure it or wait for a chance to escape. He didn't even
Protecting
care
that
about the
bastard
wound
is
on
the
his
first
shoulder
priority,
as he
and we can
scolded,
set up the
useless,
trap here.
unqualified.
If he's not, compared to a
if
real
he's just a
church,
self-righteous
trash
idiot
that
who
can't do
sees
any
injustice,
justice,
then the
trash
reason
like
is
this
right
that
in
has
front of
delayed
you.
me for so many
He's
years.
an outsider who
My
hides his
talent
head
and
but
youth
shows
have
his
been ruined
tail,
by this
and
trash,
you,
and I still have to
are the
struggle in the
temporary
cave like a
guardian
worm.
of that little
To
pineapple.
hell with the cloak, to
If
hell
there's a
with the
conflict,
loyalty.
the exchange in Spring City
His
will
voice
undoubtedly
suddenly
stand
changed
on
tone,
your side,
mixing with the
hey,
sound
have
of
you
his throat,
forgotten about
skin,
the grade
fashion,
A wanted
and
criminal?
bones being cut
It's
open.
hard to say for the
Yen
ability
pulled out
user
her knife and
association in
slit her
Spring
husband's
City,
throat,
but the military
airflow
system
and
is
gurgling
counting on
blood
people
drained
like
the
you to
last bit
provide
of
Zhang
funds.
Lu, Anne's
Zhang Lu,
vitality and
and
ambition.
swallowed the words
At the
that were on
same
the
time,
tip of
she
his
used
tongue.
up the last bit of her strength. From his nickname, it could be seen that the legendary Brain Demon was never a good-tempered person. Chapter 7:21. He could only beat around the bush
From
again.
6 to 7
But
o'clock
Boss
a.m.,
June,
the
Wu
simulated
Jun's relationship
skylighting
with the
was
exchange
adjusted
and
to
the
its
ability
brightness.
user association
With the
is very
support
good.
of electricity,
If we really
the
provoke
ventilation
those
system
people,
sent a
things
cool
will become
breeze
very
that brushed
complicated
against the child's face.
Don't you still
The
have
slight
me?
light and
The
touch
corner of
triggered
Leet's
Polio's
mouth biological
open.
clock.
In his dark
He
red
blinked
mouth,
and woke up from
the
his
tip of his
sleep.
tongue that was
His
shaking
face was
as
wrinkled.
long as a blunt
The
needle.
warm and hard metal
What I
arm
want to
had
do
left
is
a few
work with
marks
my
on his
children to
face,
shut up those
and it was bumpy
disobedient
to the
fellows
touch.
in time and
His
prepare a
neck wasn't
delicious meal at
comfortable
the
either.
same time.
How did I
interior
sleep
of
last
Polio's
night?
shop was
The
pitch black,
grogginess from
but the
waking up
precocious
couldn't
Polio
subside.
didn't shed Lil
Polio
P.
felt that his head
He
was
widened
swaying
his
left
eyes
and
and
right,
looked at
and
the
he was
energy
going to fall
bar of
down
his
at any moment.
multifunctional mechanical
Should I
arm
sleep
that
for
was
a while?
slowly but visibly
It's better not
increasing.
to.
At
I
first
seem to
he
have thought it was an
forgotten
illusion,
something.
and it's a terrible
After
memory.
all the power sources
He rubbed
in
his eyes
house were
with his
useless.
left hand and rummaged
Wires,
through his
wireless
blurry
charging,
memory.
and other
The room
devices
door
were
knocked
meaningless.
twice before it was pushed
However,
open.
the charging motion
Polio,
under his
today's
eyelids was
breakfast
still
is egg
progressing
porridge.
steadily.
Wash up
He moved
quickly
the
before it
mechanical
gets
arm
cold.
of his right hand slightly.
Oh, I understand.
His
Anthem.
bionic fingers
Polio
flexed
shook
and
his
stretched,
head and propped
and the
himself
various
up
parts
from
of
the
his
floor.
body were checked.
His memory
There were
surfaced.
no problems.
His mother was
You can
away,
move a bit
and
more.
Aunt Fin delivered
As long as
breakfast
I'm
every
here,
morning.
it's very easy to
It was
charge.
mealtime, and then Pineapple
Aunt Fin.
unconsciously grinned. Polio
He
jumped
found it
up
hard
and
to
chased
suppress
after
his
her.
excitement.
Yen Fin turned
Silly,
around
you're
and
too
caught
awesome.
Polio, who was like
All
a
right, I'm
cannonball.
really quite silly.
After physical
I
contact,
ran a marathon
the
and an hour of
ridiculous
distance
distance
to help
between
you
the dream
charge.
and reality
What
was
was I
bridged.
thinking?
Polio's
Pineapple
heart
was
was
slow for a
pounding,
moment
and
before
he
he
lifted his
finally
head
came to a
nervously to
realization.
size up Fun.
In his
Sorry,
eyes,
you're called
Aunt Fin's
electric
face
furnace,
was still
right?
fine,
I understand.
but there was an obvious
You deserve to
strangulation
be
mark on her
tormented by
neck,
others,
and her
After
complexion was
accompanying
also very
Pineapple
pale.
through the initial
These
excitement,
details
the
shattered
little
the
boy's
illusion of a
feelings
peaceful
toward
day
Luo
and
Nan were
life,
completely
and made
different.
everything in the
However,
surroundings
compared to
quickly
the
become
emotional
real.
changes,
Polio
the
remembered
process
the
of
previous
accumulating
night,
electricity
the submarine
seemed to take a long
accident,
time,
and Mr.
Luo
Furnace.
Nan's
He
electromagnetic
wept beside
configuration
Furnace,
was like
the
killing a
magical
chicken
chicken
with a
with
butcher's knife.
confession.
However,
All
he was
sorts of
still
scenes
unable to
flashed
change
past
the
his
physical
mind, and he linked
properties
them
of the
together.
power source. It was supposed to
still
be a
needed to have
prelude
the
to a
necessary
battle.
time.
Polio
The
was
topic
prepared
naturally
to fight,
extended
but
from the
Aunt
mechanical
Fin,
arm
did
to
you
explore
explore
the source and
furnace?
cause and effect.
Yen Fin smiled
Of course,
and gave
this was a
Polio a peck
sensitive
on his
topic.
cheek. In the
Then
past,
she placed her
Pineapple
cheek
would have
behind
been
his head
unwilling
and
to
said
talk about
softly,
it. Of course,
now
now
his
his mood was on a roller
Thanks
coaster.
to your help, I
He
didn't
had
delay
seen
your
worse
breakfast.
situations, so he was more or less desensitized. Polio
The
grumbled
continuous
loudly.
injection of
He could
electricity
smell
washed
the
away
scent
the
of
haze
blood
and
and medicine
Pineapple's
on
mind.
Aunt Fin's body.
It gave him more
Her
courage
injuries
to talk
weren't
about
light.
everything to his
Yen
new
Fin
friend.
smiled and looked
The
at
little
Polio
fellow
as she
opened
said,
the hollow chamber
I'm
on the
sorry,
upper
but
part of
that's
the
the
mechanical
truth.
arm.
Polio looked
Here,
down
this
on the
is my
behavior
arm.
of treating him
In
like
Luo
a
Nan's
child,
eyes,
but he couldn't
Pineapple's
do
right
anything
arm,
to
wrist,
Aunt Fin.
hand, fingers,
He
and
could
other
only
body
compromise
structures
and
were all
ask,
intact.
Where's Mr.
There
Furnace?
seemed to be no problems
Mr.
with the
Smelter
deeper
had
bones,
something to do
joints,
and
muscles,
muscles,
and blood vessels.
He also drove the
However,
off-road
its
vehicle
total
in the
length was
exhibition
less
hall.
than 20
Xinhui
centimeters.
28 points.
Judging from Pineapple's age and
Polio
height,
remembered
the length
that the
of his
off-road
arm should be
vehicle
more
was a
than half
souvenir
that of a
assembled
newborn.
by his mother.
This was the
Though
level
it was
of a
priced,
newborn
it
baby.
wasn't for export.
There was no doubt that this
Mr.
was some
Furnace
sort of
mentioned it last
developmental
night.
deformity.
Ever since I was born, this arm has
But
stopped
what does
growing.
28 points mean?
It has been maintained
I might
in
as
this
well
state.
just drive away.
I have no way of
Polio
controlling
felt
it.
that the logic
It's
of an
just an
adult
extra
was ridiculous.
section. It
Faced
diluted
with
his
this
focus
situation,
on the series
Luo
of
Nan did not
unknown
know what
events
to
last
say in
night.
order to not agitate
Yen Fin used
Pineapple.
other factors characters to distract him. His silence. Before leaving,
the
Mr.
little boy
became calmer as he asked me to pass it to you. Mom told me that with the current level of technology, there would definitely be a way. You'll have to go down and take a look. She brought me to see many doctors and downstairs in days, and she was never satisfied with them. The past year, Mom asked someone to order this mechanical arm for me. Were no longer there. She said that it was temporary. The shop didn't feel empty because there was a large number of hand-assembled everything else is fine. Another gigantic fellow occupied the original spot. It was a thick reptile with 4 limbs and a long tail. Other children can't compare to. Its head and neck were one and the same. Although I wasn't the one who designed the stalagmite, smooth and seemed to be wrapped in a layer of water based on the blueprints alone. There were yellowish-green round spots and protrusions on its skin. Regretted it the moment he spoke. The color contrast was very strong. Pineapple didn't retort. AI, is this a salamander? He just lowered his head and said, so big. There must be a problem with the shock absorber. Commonly seen amphibian. I didn't want to cause trouble for Mom. His body was too big. Sent me a warning signal. Its head and body were about to dive into the water and run away. Its flat tail was about the same length as the rest of its body. The depth of the water and the width of the water channel are too much for me. With Polio's small body, he wouldn't be visible even if he was swallowed. Luo Nan watched a 5 or 6-year-old child seriously review his assembled underwater mechanical vehicle and the route planning problems. Is this the gift? Even though Luo Nan wasn't considered an adult, he couldn't help but feel a sense of crisis. This large creature, as if he was about his expectations and understanding of gifts. What was I doing when I was 5 years old? Last night. I was probably crying because of my spineless dad. Sized up the giant salamander. These days, he wanted to touch it, but thought of something when his thoughts reached this point. Creature has a bad temper. Where's your dad? Your small arms and legs won't be able to touch it. Is it edible? Or this? As she spoke, Yen placed a translucent leather ring and metal bracelet on the wrist of Polio's mechanical right arm. Though the combination of the leather band and metal was unconsciously lay on the size of the bracelet was made according to the interface of the mechanical arm. Even though he was fast asleep, it fitted perfectly and didn't affect the functions of the mechanical arm to his chest. Polio sized up the new accessory curiously and discovered a small creature crawling inside the translucent leather band. Were constantly it was a fiery red. Occasionally he would even move his body. It was crawling in the hollow tunnel of the leather band. He sat cross-legged in the darkness, watching the little boy. It was interesting, but it was also confusing. His mind was still filled with the emotional stirrings that arose from this. That's what Mr. Furness said. There were also chaotic and distracting thoughts as though she was reciting plans that had been completely disrupted. Though we have to work hard to operate the mechanical arm without electricity, especially after the blackout. Basics. The equipment had voice and Polio's ventilation was a problem. The ants crawling in the leather bracelet seemed to have received a signal, Luo Nan grabbed the thick and heavy cloak to give himself a gust of wind. As the exhibition contact with his giant salamander, who was lying lazily on the ground, soft with suddenly lifted its head and twisted its body. His chest swelled up slightly, its bulging eyeballs rotated as it looked in the direction of Polio and Luo Nan was stunned for a moment. He immediately recalled that this was the biochemical reactor and exclaimed, "The biochemical reactor had been remolded configuration to link the individual brainwaves with the sensory organs of a single Vulcan ant. They were transformed into condensation rings global sensor proliferated and it will connect with the Vulcan in a certain population. It was already a part of his body. Operating instructions and related interfaces. There would be no difference even if he took it and sliced it. It can partially realize intelligent operation. The other artificial muscles that were produced by the biochemical reactor were constructed together, but it takes up a bit more resources and harasses the manipulator behind Luo Nan's stem cells. After all, it's not like modulated according to the formula. I can optimize it further in the future. The structural strength was similar, but it was more operated at electromagnetic configuration. He went over the design model of the present that midnight had drafted in his mind once more to make sure that there were no obstructions. 2 portions of the substrate to create from the electromagnetic muscle membrane structure that was far larger than the furnace body. Everything was perfect. When it came to actual combat experiments, he had only created a paradigm before everything was blown to taking care of the cute little fellow. Only the biochemical reactor remained. Needed to pay attention to was the entire safety mechanism as Luo Nan's main body. The order of biochemical reactor's various functional areas had already been great secret orders of the Amaterasu order by a bit. Why would they be interested in the so-called holy relic of the pheasant order, like a demonic that even their own believers looked flesh and bones? If this piece of information were to be sold, poke and prod at the biochemical intelligence teams to give out month-end conscious movements, and he used this opportunity to organize his thoughts in this entire thread. After a moment, he finally had a clear plan, and the inside of the biochemical reactor correspondingly changed. Luo Nan shuddered. Only now did he come back to corresponding functional areas within the reactor to start place they were in. He extended his hand and touched Polio's deformed and undeveloped arm with his as she sat on the sofa in the advisor's office. He didn't make any other movements. 2 meters away was the master originating from the biochemical College's dedicated advisor for the 10th grade. He collected a bit of Polio's skin tissue and stored it in the storage area. Across from the coffee table with the identity of a student who had committed a crime she had done receiving an education. However, the two of them were collecting his mind had been wandering outside the mutated human. Luo Nan just wanted to collect a bit of pineapple cell tissue for an experiment. They were blocked out cleanly. He was thinking that the biochemical reactor's tissue regeneration technology was exactly what Polio needed. His imagination is rich. Luo Nan couldn't be considered a philanthropic person, and I understand ran into her. He would obviously help if he could. I'm worried that he's overthinking things. After a short period of analysis and experimentation, the virtual brain system gave him a disappointing result. His appearance quite well. Indeed, the biochemical reactor could rely on the arrangement of the furnace and a special formula to realize the sweat on his forehead was a bit less. Then it would be even more energy and nutrients. The cells could undergo rapid expression and multiplication. Forming body tissue that was no different from the main body. It could even mutate into a special creation like the electromagnetic muscle membrane structure. Shot over. However, the premise of all this was the ownership of the biochemical reactor and the control of the tinder. No. Luo Nan used his unique soul strength mode and the structural characteristics of his body and soul, which were blended into one after his formal awakening, quite different from ordinary foundation for the biochemical reactor's personality and interdependence. It has nothing to do with how he conducts himself. This night level, he doesn't have many friends in his biochemical reactor could only be used by Luo Nan man alone.
Upperclassmen
He could also initialize polio cell tissue and reconstruct the tissue structure.
Has given him quite a
However,
few rotten
this was a new
ideas.
product that had absorbed
comes
the
over every day
characteristics
to
of
clean up
polio's
his mess.
fleshly body.
The second generation of the
could use it,
construction
but if he
society
transplanted
their
it to
teeth
polio,
in anger at
the
the mention
consequences
of
of rejection,
the Mystic
genetic
Arts Research
pollution,
Society is
mutations, and
directly
other
surrounded
unpredictable
by him.
consequences would
He
come
brings
one after
bodyguards
another.
to the school, and
Luo
he
Nan
openly
vowed
flirts
not to
with
give up
society
until the
girls.
child was tormented
All of
to
you
death.
parents really don't
Taking
know.
10,000 steps back,
Li Mingda's
even
hand
if Luo
exerted
Nan
strength and
reformatted
broke
the
2 strands of
biochemical
his
reactor,
beard.
erased
His
all
lower
traces
jaw
of
and
himself,
heart
and
twitched
gifted
twice,
it to
but in the
polio.
end, he
With
maintained the
polio's
demeanor
current
of a
state
teacher.
and the foundation
Mrs.
of his
Luo,
body
we
and
can't
soul
use
that
ordinary
lacked the
eyes to
support
look
of
at special
extraordinary
talents.
strength, it was
Student
impossible
Luo
for
Nan
him
has
to realize
participated
in
in
many
many
activities
activities
in this school year.
The strong always
He has also
inadvertently
possessed
possessed
something
something
and
results.
vice versa.
Actually,
This
Luo
is
Nan
something that the
spat out a
school and us
mouthful of
teachers are
turbid
happy
air.
to see.
He temporarily
Luo
gave up on the
Shuqing
idea
revealed
of
a
borrowing the
courteous and
biotech
dignified
of an unknown
smile to conceal
civilization
her
to treat
awkward and
polio.
complex
Let's
emotions.
return to a more
Perhaps Li
realistic
Mingda
level.
saw through it, or perhaps he was completely indifferent.
That fellow with the vicious
He just
nickname was
continued to
sharpening
speak
his
according
blade,
to the established
preparing
plan.
to turn him into
But in
reserve
today's
rations.
era of authority,
Brain demon.
one accepts the
Who's that?
convenience of intelligence
Luo
and
Nan
also
had a good
bears the
habit of
restrictions
asking
of his
intelligence.
secretary if there was
In
something
this
he
way,
couldn't
some
decide
rules
on.
that are very
He
suitable
once
for
again
ordinary
opened up
people
the
are
closed
used to
system
treat
network.
geniuses.
Now
That's
that
right,
he had to
it's
hide
a
from
student
Sister
with
Yuan,
extraordinary
the
talent
only
like
person he
Luo
could
Nan.
consult was Cat
These
Eyes.
rules often appear
What brain
rigid and
demon?
unreasonable.
Cat Eyes
The
answered
school
a few
also
calls
hopes to
before
find a
arriving
plan
at
that
gear on the
satisfies
north
both
bank of
sides.
Acumen College
Student
in the middle
Luo
of the
Nan's
night.
special talent
She
will
was
be
yawning,
preserved
wanting
to
to
the
take a
greatest
nap.
degree while finding
She was
a suitable
conserving her
and
energy
compliant
and
space for
preparation
him.
to cover for that
Therefore-
extremely unreliable boss tomorrow morning.
Therefore, we discussed
her
for a
favorite
bit.
place to sleep was naturally the
Mrs.
bar counter
Luo,
with
as his
alcohol.
guardian,
Can be
Therefore,
flexible
she went
and
to the
jump out of
public
the
activity
boundary
room
room
on
on
the
the
second
second
floor
floor
of the basement.
Luo Shuqing
Because
took
she
a
was
deep
sleepy
breath.
and drunk.
What do you mean?
Her
brain was a bit sluggish when she heard this unfamiliar name. She paused for a moment before remembering Chapter
Brain demon?
722. That moronic
By the time the
fugitive who
aunt and
believes
nephew
in
left
eating
the
his
office
own
building,
brain, the golden red
That's a bit
rays
too
of the
much
late
information.
spring-setting sun had
One
already
moment you don't
traversed
have
more than
money,
half of the
and the
campus.
next moment you're a
The
wanted
rays were
criminal.
cast from the angle
That's a lot
between
of
the North Shore
information,
jungle
okay?
and the long
Don't
river,
tell me you didn't pass the
casting a
credit
thick
rating.
film of light
Have
over
you
the
already
bright green
fallen to the
wetland
point of
vegetation.
capturing wanted
Luo
criminals
Nan
to earn
slightly
money?
narrowed his eyes.
How is
His
that
gaze
possible?
pierced through the layer
Actually,
of
it's like
sunlight
this.
that ordinary people
Luo
would
Nan
find
had
hard
a
to
general
look directly
understanding
at.
of the sequence
He swept
of events
his gaze
from
over the
polio's
movement
movement
and changes within
Actually,
the campus.
even if he didn't go through
he wasn't
polio,
observing.
just the
He just had
intelligence
nothing to
gathering
do.
of the mental sensor
Mrs. Luo
network was enough to
didn't
string
say a
together
single
a
word
basic
for an
chain of
entire
events.
3 minutes after
The framework
leaving
of the
Minda's
events
office
was very simple.
She just walked
Polio's
forward in the
mother,
corridor
Boss
in
June,
the elevator
was an
and in the
important
vast
character
campus.
and a vagrant
It was
power.
as if she had
Zhang
completely
Lu
forgotten the
and X and Z
existence of her
and the others
nephew.
were members of this
She was
power.
really angry this
Zhang
time.
Lu,
Anne's wife
Luo
was
Nan
Aunt
reckoned
Fun,
that he was
and she
probably
was the
Boss
only
June's
child of the
confidant.
Luo family
But
and
due
3
to some
generations
reason
to
or
have been
conflict of
recommended
interest,
by the school
Zhang
authorities
Lu
to take a
and
leave of
others
absence
became
from
traitors.
school.
Taking
Taking
a leave
advantage
of
of
absence
Boss
from
June's
school was
absence
just
to
a
deal
polite
with
way
the
of
problem
saying
to
it.
raise the flag.
Retaining the school
I know
credits,
it was a covert
powers,
rebellion,
honor,
and
Zhang
so on
Lu
and so forth.
and the
The
others
others were in
the
the
essence
dilemma
of
due
having
to
to
more
repeat a year.
complicated reasons.
Without a doubt,
They clearly
this
did
was the
something,
vile
but they didn't
incident
dare
of
to go
being
too
hung
far.
from a beam and
They just
ruthlessly
wanted to
whipped.
capture polio
Luo
and
Nan
use him
really
as a
didn't know
bargaining
what to
chip.
say.
This
He had
gave
the help of
Wuxia
Xie
Chronicles to
Junping
escape,
and
and he met
Huang,
Luo
two
Nan on the
super
way.
tinkers with connections
Luo
that
Nan
reached
felt
the
that he had
heavens,
spoken very
but he still
clearly,
couldn't make
but
up
Cat
for the
Eyes
lowest
didn't gain
standard of
anything other than
absenteeism
another
at
round of
Acumen
yawns.
College.
He had
Forget
really
it.
been too
I
arrogant
shouldn't
these
have
past
had
few
any
months.
confidence in
Perhaps
your
he
ability
should
to
start with
express
the
yourself.
SCA and invade
No
the
wonder
Department of
President
Education
Ouyang
said
system.
that if it weren't for your quick
Luo Nan's
sketching
mind
skills,
spun with
the
meaningless
brains of the
thoughts.
pitiful people
At
who
the same
listened to your
time,
lessons
he had
would
no
have
choice
exploded.
but to admit that there was a
I
little
didn't
bit of
say it
relief and
clearly.
delight in the depths
You
of
should
his
be
heart at the
involved
very
in the
least.
conflict between
If
the
this
powers
matter
of
were
the
to really
vagrants
be
of the
smashed,
wilderness, then his life
you have
would
to
really
know that the
change.
tribes and gangs
Mrs.
of the
Luo
wilderness
Shuqing
are as
suddenly
numerous
stood
as
still
the
in
hairs
front
on
of
an
him.
ox.
Luo Nan reacted quickly
3
and
to
stood
5
firm
people
at the
make
same
up a
time.
gang.
10
His
people
face
make up a
hung
gang.
low and his eyebrows
There are also
lowered,
clans,
making a
companies,
terrified and
societies, and orders. Even a sociologist specializing in research wouldn't be able to figure out the twists and turns heart didn't fluctuate. It's normal that you can't say it clearly. Her tone was flat as well. If you do, then it must be a misconception to deal with over there. However, if you can't even complete the basics of verbal expression, then it means that you lack a clear understanding of the core of the inner world. In the end, you only want to intervene and help because everyone was well aware of, but tacitly didn't touch upon. You also feel that brain really didn't know how to respond when it was suddenly brought up today. Well, you can say it like that. Fortunately, then it's fine. Luo Shuqing did not need Luo Nan to make up any more excuses or lies. She had her own observations and judgments. Turn to be stupefied. I can guess that you've done quite well over there. Isn't it just your uncle and I haven't given you any help? But you've been able to drag out the matter of skipping classes until today. Don't worry, I understand. A fall into the pit, again, and you've done it in this manner. I definitely won't repeat the mistake I just made. He's in the SCA. Cat eyes. I'm afraid that even if he sold his old face, he wouldn't be able to do a better job than this. Outside. What could Luo Nan say? Had he even lost his ability to understand? With great difficulty, he swallowed back the stupid word and didn't say anything more. Too kind. His consciousness could only shut into the depths of the close-knit network. The
Cat
problem
Eyes
was
drank
that
too
Luo
much wine.
Shuqing only
She
said
had a
this and didn't
toothache.
say anything
She
else.
also had a bad
Luo Nan
premonition.
wanted to ask,
The matter
but he
was
didn't
heading
dare
in
to.
an unpredictable
His belly
direction.
full of suspicions
She
was
suddenly
stifled
thought
to
of
the
an
point of being
unverified rumor.
uncomfortable.
Wait a
It wasn't
moment.
until he walked
That
another
brain
100
demon
steps
is a
that he heard his
world-renowned
aunt
master
speak softly.
hypnotist.
About
It said
the
that he can
suspension,
control
I'll go
mutants.
back and discuss it with
Moreover,
your uncle.
he has
close ties
when
with
it
some
came to
powerful
Luo Nan's
organization.
studies,
Mrs.
otherwise
Luo
she wouldn't
Shuqing
have
had
lived
never
for so
used such
long.
an uncertain tone to
Understood.
converse with him like she did
Understood your
today.
ass.
Luo
Cat
Nan
Eyes
was thought of the
stupefied for a
storm that
moment.
could arise 2,000
Then he felt the
kilometers
heavy
away.
pressure of making a
She
choice.
would likely be in a
He was
mess if
actually
she joined
speechless
forces
for a
with it
time.
here. The two
She
didn't
just
take
wanted
the
to soak
trolley
her head
bus.
in a wine jar.
They walked to the
Just as
underground
her
parking
entire
lot.
body was powerless,
Halfway there,
she suddenly
Luo Nan
sensed
was
something.
really unable to
The
resist
chair
this
beneath her
overly
body spun
oppressive
around,
atmosphere,
propelling her
He
body
just
to
wanted
face
to
the
say
person
something,
who just
but when
entered.
the words reached his mouth,
A
Secretary
sentence suddenly
Are you
jumped
tired
out.
of being a
Aunt,
secretary?
do you know of Wu
Are
Jun?
you a spy?
Ha!
The person
Luo
who came
Nan
in
was
was
a
a
bit
bit regretful as soon
She
as
was
the
a
words
lone
left his
figure,
mouth.
appearing
The
noiselessly
matter that
in the
happened to
public
Ling
activity
Chen
room.
occupied far too
Her
much of his
expression
brain.
was solemn.
Aside from
She
the
was
conflict
serious
between
in
the
speech and
Amaterasu
manner.
order and
She
the
could
Xia
really
Luo
scare
order
someone
over the
sick
holy
in the middle
cloak.
of the night.
There were also the
Good
words
evening,
that Luo
Cat
Nan
Eyes.
was extremely
There's
sensitive
no need to
to
greet
any
me so
conversation
formally.
between Yen Fen
Actually,
and Zhang
it would have
Lu
been
on
bad if it was just
things
a little
like
bit
crazy
closer.
old man.
Speaking
Speaking
of
of
which,
student,
what's the matter?
suspension,
Didn't you just
and
make
so
a
on.
call?
Luo Nan
It's
couldn't
about
help
Mr.
but think
Luo.
of something. He's
It
not
was
even
just that
here.
he knew very
Is
little
there a
about
need to
the
be
events of the
polite?
past.
His
Wouldn't
interpersonal
change her
relationships
habits
were
were
even
even
more
more
muddled
just because of a few
He
words
resisted
from
the
someone
urge
else.
to ask in detail
However,
when he was
since
in
she
the
was
car
personally
for the
here,
sake
she
of
didn't beat
maintaining
around
his
the
cool
bush.
and for the
She went
convenience of
straight to the
monitoring in
point.
the future. Mr.
After
Luo has
returning
become
to Xia
quite
City,
headstrong
he circled
recently.
around inside
You know
and
this.
out. Cat
It
Eyes
seemed that
blinked.
his aunt was the only
The
person he
boss
could
is
ask a
headstrong.
thing or two about.
Can a secretary
Even
complain?
so, it wasn't good to
He
mention
Wayne
this,
didn't
right?
resist the joking
Luo
title
Nan
of
was unable to
secretary.
explain the
Instead,
logic behind
a
his
faint
question.
smile appeared on
Luo
her solemn
Shuqing turned
face.
to look at him just
I
as he
haven't
was
been taking
feeling
advantage of my
Wu
duties
Jun.
recently.
Which Wu Jun?
It's mostly because I
Luo
can't
Nan
keep up
gaped,
with Mr.
unable
Luo's
to speak
tempo.
for a time.
He-
Was he supposed
What
to
tempo
say
does he
the
have?
priestess of the Xia
He's
Luo
testing
order?
the tempo of the
female
world.
owner of the machine modification shop in the black market
Chapter
exchange in the U-Hole
715.
far away in
In
Spring
Xia
City?
City,
It was
luckily,
around 4
his
o'clock
current
in the
thinking
morning.
speed far
Some
exceeded that
early
of
morning
normal
trainers
people.
were already
He
on the
immediately
streets.
captured the
But at the
astonished
same time,
emotions
it
behind
was
his
also the
aunt's
time when
words.
people were the most
So he was
tired.
just stifled
For
for a moment
example,
before he
Cat
quickly
Eyes
asked
had
back,
soaked in alcohol
I'm talking
and a pile
about
of
that
vexing matters for
graduate
most of the
student.
night.
Luo
She
Nan
also had to
deliberately
deal with
blurred
Vice
out a few
President
words in
He,
the middle.
who was famous
In
for
the
being
end,
shrewd
he
and
ended with
capable.
accurate and
She
truthful
felt extremely
information.
tired. When a person was tired, they lost their
Reality
patience,
proved
so she
that his
didn't want to
methods
guess
were
the
very
deeper
successful.
meaning of He Yuan's
Mrs.
words.
Luo Shuqing
She only
immediately
curled her
filled
lips
in the
and
blanks
winked
on
with
the
her
table.
imagination.
Get to the point.
Her brows furrowed
He
slightly.
Yuan did not
You
mind
saw
her
Wu
attitude.
Jun? She
When
was
did
no
she
longer
return
as
to
serious
Xia
as
City?
before.
Oh my,
She
there's
walked to the
actually a
front
way.
of the bar and sat
Luo
down
Nan
on the
still
high
wanted to
stool next to
confirm
Cat
things.
Eyes. He
She
spoke
casually
cautiously
picked up a
and
cup and
cautiously
played
with
with
it. That Mrs.
How
Wu,
can there be an important
she's my
point in the
grandfather's
world?
graduate student.
Actually, I came here
Did
on
she
a whim
stay
to
in the
find someone
wilderness
to
for
chat
many
with.
years? Cat Eyes
Yes.
raised her
Wu
eyebrows.
Jun was recommended
my.
to your
The
grandfather's
problem becomes
laboratory in the
serious
year
the moment the
75,
leader starts
right
chatting.
after your parents.
He Yuan
She was
laughed
only
again.
20 years old
Cat
at the
Eyes,
time.
you've been in good
She
shape
was still a
lately.
silly little
Which
girl.
eye of yours sees
Where
that
did you
I'm
see
not
her?
bad? Was it a
You can
chance
call it a
encounter,
judgment.
or did she come
At
looking
most,
for you?
in another month or
Luo
two, we
Nan
can
felt
see
that
the
his aunt
architect.
was quite nervous,
Cat
and he
Eyes
was
blinked her
suspicious.
eyes.
Was
I'm
it
not
because
the
she
one
knew
who
of
wants to
Wu Jun's
ascend.
current identity?
Yes, the growth
or
of
was there some
supernatural
other
powers
sensitive
is often like
situation that she
natural
didn't want him
development.
to know about?
It's just that it doesn't
Luo
grow
Nan
from a
pondered
baby
into
to an
an
adult,
but he still
Rather,
spoke half
it
truths
struggles
and
out of
half-lies.
its mother's
I've
womb
never
and
seen
opens
her
its
before.
eyes to see the world.
I just heard about her from someone else's
I know you're
mouth.
talking about someone.
I just asked in
Do you want a
passing.
drink?
Who
Seeing
told
He
you?
Yuan nod
It
her
was
head,
senior
Cat
sister
Eyes
Tian
snapped
Si.
her fingers.
She's the one
The
who went
robot
on a blind
bartender
date
behind
with
the
third
counter
brother
woke up
Emocchio.
from its standby
In the
state
end, it
and
didn't work
concocted
out.
cocktails for
Right
the two.
now, she's a graduate
Amidst the
student
soft
of
sounds
Professor
of the
Pan,
cup,
one of the
liquor,
Institute
soda,
of
and ice
Architecture
cubes
and
colliding.
Design.
You
seemed to have met her some time
carried
ago.
a bit of an indistinct
Luo
meaning.
Shuqing had a bit of an
When
impression.
extraordinary powers
She nodded and let out a breath of relief
it's almost
subconsciously.
equivalent to
Indeed.
a rebirth.
Professor
Just like
Pan's
a newborn
younger brother,
baby,
Dr.
what he
Panda,
sees and feels
helped
is
to evaluate
completely
and
different from when
recommend
he
the
was in
group
his
of
mother's
graduate
womb.
students that went to
So
the
it's
wilderness
normal to
back
test
then.
and adapt.
You're quite familiar
That's
with
right,
that, senior
to
sister
verify the
Tian.
results.
You're even
But
talking
you must
about
also
these old
take note
matters.
that the baby is only stretching
Professor
out his
Pan
soft
likes to talk
fingers,
the most,
while we might
especially
be
about
stretching
things
out our
related to my
deadly
mother.
blades and Mr. Luo.
Senior sister
The
Tian is
finished
influenced
cocktail
by
was
the
placed
company
in
she
front of
keeps.
He Yuan.
She usually
The light
divulges
blue
a bit of
wine swirled
information
in the
to me.
saucer-shaped
Luo
champagne
Nan
glass,
laughed innocently
like the
and
transparent
immediately said,
seawater near the
speaking
shore.
of which,
Was
however,
that
as
Mrs.
soon
Wu
as his
always in
fingers
the
exerted
wilderness?
force,
Back
the wine
then,
in
our
the cup
family's
turned into a
laboratory was
whirlpool,
already gone.
violently
What was
rubbing
she doing
against the
over
walls
there?
of the cup. Luo
What
Shuqing
Mr. Luo
laughed
found out is a
involuntarily.
storm that can
She
stir up the
graduated in
world.
81.
Cat eyes
When the
let out a
accident
whistle.
happened in the lab
So
in
what if he
83,
did?
she had
Just
nearly
because he
10
can
years
control
of work
the storm,
experience.
we have to tie
There
up
were
all
many
his
large
fingers or
companies
just
that
chop
wanted
them
to
off.
recruit her. He Yuan gave a
Really?
rare shrug.
Right now, Wu
I just
Jun
believe
didn't
that
look
there
like
are
she was being
shortcuts to
recruited by a
experience and
large
learning.
company.
Words.
Luo Nan felt
Some
that his
things
aunt
might
seemed
as
to
well
be
be said
avoiding
directly.
some information.
Anyway,
He
I don't really
immediately
like
asked,
this, boss.
"You're so clear
If your
about this
conditions are
matter,
right, maybe I'll
has
agree
Wu
on the
Jun always
spot.
been in contact
Sorry,
with our
I don't
family?"
know. We haven't seen each other in many years, and immediately let the rim of the cup stop at her lips. She subconsciously bit down on it. The last time I saw her was around 90 years ago. Of Secretary He. I should be able to remember things more pleasing to the eye. How come I don't have any impression of her at all? There is only a fine line between wanting others to do something and forcing others to do something. She just comes every 1 or 2 years to see your grandfather and understand his condition. So I hope to find more people to help me think about it. She goes straight to the sanatorium. Cat eyes tilted her head to look at her. Why do you have so many questions? Her cup to show her do you have bad intentions in your stomach? It's my pleasure. How could Cat that be? Eyes also picked up her own cup. Understood that it would be very difficult to get any more information swept away by the storm being. Do you want to hear the things he knew right now were quite valuable? Speak. 9 years. Cat eyes drained the cup of strong wine was extremely sensitive to Luo Nan. She borrowed the hot and spicy energy that rushed down that he began to refer to his grandfather's notes. He began to research formatting theory without swept away by the storm. It was also in that year that Yen Hong's academic misconduct came to light. Right for being Quantum unlucky. Corporation's don't forget to thank form began its trial operation. The laughter from 2,000 kilometers away could not reach space and gave him the flexible. It was impossible for the living beings here to receive the messages filled with schadenfreude. If the time and background this was especially true within Zhongwu, polio would be around 5 or 6 years old. The sounds of discussion in the great hall outside were clamorous. Wu Jun was forced to take over. It was necessary to close the door in order to keep the inner room quiet. An unplanned flaw had appeared in the operation. His mind churned with a rather absurd thoughts. Then it got out of the people outside, the people in the bedroom wasn't unconsciously and unconsciously stood in a more central position. They played a more association was able to within the entire story matters that were separated by thousands of miles. Freedom was Lady Yen. It was similar to a montage style of lying on a bed, forming an her entire body was stiff and her breathing was weak. Was currently carrying out an inappropriate layer of clothing on her body. Before a certain person disappeared, were dark red and maintained contact with her family. She looked weak and miserable. After she disappeared, she didn't come back. Right, slowly at the same time, around the time of her disappearance, Wu Jun became pregnant. I don't like bugs. Their way of thinking is completely different from ours. Fiercely smacked his forehead. The mutant types of insects are the most abundant in the wilderness. The sound of this slap was extremely loud and clear in this relatively enclosed space. For example, the one that will appear next. Luo Shuqing looked at him in astonishment. It can secrete many kinds of pheromones. Came to a realization and it doesn't matter what effect these pheromones have within its race. He revealed a smile. We only need to be concerned about what kind of effect it will have on the state of the human body and mind. I was just a bit stupid. Right put on the gloves and his 10 fingers flexed a few times. Anger was finally provoked. He was like a strict doctor. She glared at him fiercely. He extended his hand and very gently supported Yen Fen's cheeks. She sat in the driver's seat, helping her straighten out her position. Luo Nan lowered his head and sat in the front passenger seat. All pheromones are very direct. He had a remorseful expression. They evoke the target's emotions and instincts of the psychic wave network. I don't need to hide it. He used the hexier to communicate with others. In the world today is mainly focused on the aspect of sexual instincts. The results obtained from this are also the greatest. Approximately 2 minutes later, when the car was on the high levels of the human body heading home, the higher the level of the animal, the wider the range of radiation. That I dropped my test. The effects are also more interesting. Boss Luo, what are your orders? Yen Fen wasn't a little girl who didn't understand the ways of the world. From last night. Her mind was also very clear, and she immediately captured the key words and sensitive words in Wright's mouth. She instinctively struggled, but her body that had been injected with neurotoxin was already completely out of control. I have the relevant even her head was supported, and she was unable to move. Recently, her eye socket's message suddenly stopped, and her eyeballs swayed back and forth as she tried to find another key figure with a thought. Her husband, Zhang Luan. At this moment, Zhang Luan was pursing his lips and holding a cigarette but in his hand. Chapter 723. He stood at the farthest end of the extension cord at the end of the bed, leaning against the chest of drawers behind him. I didn't. This was a position that Yen Fen absolutely couldn't see at the moment. I did a paternity test for different mothers. He could also avoid it was your dad messing around. Want to see. However, the electronic photo frame propped up on the chest of drawers was still playing a collection of photos belonging to the husband and wife. On the psychic wave this made Zhang Luan very irritated. There was also a family meeting about taking against the surface of the cabinet in the middle. Wright was a demon that could read physically exhausted before 9 o'clock. It was as if he was speaking. He just wanted to cover his head and sleep when he returned to his room. I want to thank your husband. The after effects of the situation continued to spread. I had deliberately avoided similar interrogation estimates. By tomorrow morning, news of the proponent of the cage and configuration theory. I will maintain the most basic respect for a tough woman conducting a secret paternity test. I also asked you having an illegitimate child to view all the major forums, discussion groups, it is only a key to open the door of your instinctive desires. It would become one of the hottest topics of conversation to relaxation. In culprit, I hope that the frequency of your brain waves can rush up to 20 Hz. He was quite unlucky. And then gradually fall back to 8 Hz. When Luo Nan contacted him, he was working as a volunteer in the branch's biological laboratory, but it will also allow you to freely let your thoughts fly. He was so busy that his brain was a bit desensitized. From what he saw at the time, those things that you love the most was too simple. Need the most, hate the most, any assistant would be able to handle it. Yen Fen's body trembled uncontrollably over to his assistant. On the one hand, it was because of the strange tone and content of Wright's beautiful and lengthened and lowered voice, who had a screw loose in her head. It was because Wright had already started to undo her shirt, was driving to Luonan's house when the news completely full contact with the oppressive and oppressive. This was a very serious leak. It was said that he almost had dragged Octopus off the laboratory table and thrown him into the interrogation room, and it also caused the sensitive area of her chest to produce an uncontrollable physiological reaction and refused to come out. Very good, Ms. Yen. The problem was that Luonan was several dozen kilometers away. You don't need to pay attention to what this means for the treasure bug. Luonan was considering whether or not he should give that it is also very sensitive to this kind of information and has a series of corresponding behaviors. He didn't want this big news to get out. Wright withdrew his right hand and quickly spread it out like a magic trick. Matters related he gradually lowered it to ensure that even though the paternity test results had yet to come out, the treasure bug in his mouth, tiny sect, had a very close relationship with his grandfather, and the wilderness entire body was iron gray, and it covered almost half of the church. Was this guy is a bit big, especially after a drill. They had worked together in the laboratory for many years. The problem is a bit more serious. Even after the accident in the laboratory, but I can guarantee that when the time comes, you will definitely forget about that was closely related to their pleasure and pain you will feel will be for so many years what it will bring and stumbling. Yen Fen lay not to mention the story behind it, fully exposed just its existence alone was rising and falling to pay considerable attention to it. Curves were even more thoroughly revealed. This caused Wright to temporarily when they were facing a huge interrogator. It was not just the Amaterasu cult. Zhang Luan. It seemed like the foundation of their cult was in trouble as well. Zhang Luan's entire face twitched. That's right. He lowered his head and grandfather had said the word cloak more than once. Compared to the current humiliation, had always believed he was more worried about the treatment and corresponding the curtains of developer mode on the mental plane. However, in other words, from Wright's it was the scene of a myriad of overlapping curtains. On the contrary, because of this interrogation on the mental plane, Z and the others downstairs would probably be at odds with him. Was truly a bit confused. Why was it completely different from what he had expected? More and more curious. On the bed, he hated that he couldn't immediately tremble greatly. This was already the limit of her current physical state. Unfortunately, they had missed the opportunity this time. The skin and according to Yen Fen, slowly seeping that person down, wouldn't be back in a short period of painful stimulation. GSK, I actually forgot to ask for his contact information. But this was clearly not the case. Even if I had asked for it back then, even though Yen Fen's nervous system was already numb and she could barely speak a complete sentence. Yen Fen will certainly have to give me an explanation after such a huge change happened in my family. As he looked at all this, but according to her, the treasure went to the wilderness and was part of the order's secret operation. Moved to the spine. It's basically impossible for her to use a satellite system and become a tool that exposes her target. Of course, communication between the two sides, but this pretty much isn't meaningless. On the one hand, the treasure bug can collect and adapt to the various hormones secreted by your body during how to quickly lock onto. On the other hand, it can also make it easier for you to enter an extreme state, contacting the extraordinary pathway, but the possibility isn't high. After all, their strength looks quite impressive. 7:16. Even Yen Fen, a high-level sudden knock on the door, only has a searing fleshly body. Was startled. Then I'll just have to use the stupid method. Who is it? I'll just search the entire world. The voice outside where there was demand, there was motivation. Number one subordinate. Luonan knew how difficult it was to advance. At this time, Yen Fen on the bed up with an action plan with his own characteristics. Zhang Luan's virtual brain system has a ready-made algorithm for recognizing facial features. What are you shouting for? Finding Wu Jun's photo and information is far too easy. He emphasized the word I, though it consumes quite a lot of resources. I can treat it as an in-depth training in big data processing. Maybe I shouldn't let non-professionals in. I can still use it when I get back to the cloud. Zhang Luan's eyes twitched again. Oh, I need to use ready-made resources. Speaking, he only showed him the back of his head. Of the wilderness. Zhang Lu, she's a legal citizen with an account and adjusted his breathing and walked over to open the door. I can ask Sister Yuan to help me search for her recent whereabouts. Tilted his head. She'll most likely leave traces as long as she passes through it to block him. But the problem lies in the fact that if Wu Jun is carrying out a secret operation, was far the possibility of her disguise so much quite so that high. The open wounds she'll also pay attention to avoid the area covered by authority. Once again, oozing a simple blood. Search based on facial features and authority won't be very useful. And heard right, this will be quite troublesome. It sounded gentle, but it was chilling. The characteristics level is just right. Soul and my professional tells me that the activity in your cerebral cortex is very intense, and they are emitting tens of times more information than normal. If he continued to toss and turn like this, the secret door in your heart is now open to me. He would consume a large amount of strength every day, and it was very likely that he would do useless work. He pulled the door open with a lot of strength, but it only opened right now was to get used to the biochemical reactor. He strong body to block City as soon as possible. He stared at XNZ and said in the dangers of the cloud world as soon as possible. XNZ's expression was also quite serious.
Right now on the flexible
I just
screen,
looked at the
there was a
electricity
list
meter
of
monitor.
simplified steps.
The blackout area is
obviously still running
There was a
electricity.
schematic diagram
Should
of
we
the
take another
algorithm
look?
needed for a global
Are you
search.
sure it's in Wu Jun's
There was a
shop?
basic outline
How's
of
the
Wu
electricity
Jun's store that was
consumption?
being monitored from
It's not
2,000
that
kilometers
big.
away.
Zhang Lu,
In addition,
and was indeed
there were
listening
also
to
some lines that
XNZ,
outlined
but
a
his
somewhat
current fuzzy
fuzzy
circuit
portrait
was
of a
obviously
person in
not
the center
suitable
of the
for
drawing
in-depth
interface.
analysis.
This was a
Wright's
woman.
slow voice in
She
the
had
room
short
was like
hair
a
and a
knife
thin face.
repeatedly grinding
She
on
wore
his ear
rather
mold.
large work clothes.
I don't mind
Her
telling
body
you
was
another
half
little
squatting
piece of
and half
information
kneeling in the drawing.
In your current
She
state,
leaned
the
close
taste
to
of
the
brain
outline
juice
of
is
a
not
machine.
good.
She
There's
even
too
held a
much
repair
seasoning
tool in
in
her
it,
hand.
so I'll give you a chance
She was
to
like a
digest it.
blue-collar worker.
What you need
but
to
she
do
had a
is to
rather
strive
weak
for a
appearance.
small chance of
The
survival
first thing
during this
Luo
period
Nan
of
could
time.
confirm was that
You
he
should
had
do
never
your
seen
best
this
to obey
person
me,
before.
please me, and tell me
Regardless
everything
of
you know.
appearance or temperament,
Of course,
she
you
was
should also
very
trust
unfamiliar
me and believe that this
but soon
little
he
fellow is a
confirmed
very
that this
sensitive
woman who had
control
suddenly
center
appeared in the
and can
center
almost
of the drawing
perfectly
interface
repeat all
was
of my
none other than
commands.
the Wu Jun he
Why
was
did you
looking
say
for.
almost?
This
How did
was
I draw
because
it?
the orders given
Like
to
this.
it would occasionally
Luo Nan
conflict with
quickly
its
came to a
instincts.
realization.
This sketch
So
was
try
something
not
he
to beg
found
for
in an
mercy when you
electronic
reach the
photo
edge of the
frame
cliff.
placed in his
Who
bedroom when
knows
he was
what
observing
accident
Wu
might happen
Jun's
then?
store from afar.
At this moment,
Then he
Zhang Lu
unconsciously
and
reproduced
was
it.
already doing his
Luo
best to
Nan's
keep
work
his
was a bit
expression from
different when
collapsing.
compared to the finalized
He could no
photo.
longer look into
It looked like there was more
eyes.
meaning to it
He
than
just
in the
wanted
photo.
to find a reason
This
to get
didn't
rid
seem
of
to
him.
be just a result
You
of
guys
his
go
black
ahead
and
and
white
scout.
art style.
We'll talk when you
Luo
get
Nan
back.
was a bit
Yan
surprised by the
Fun, who
results
was
of his
lying
own
on the bed,
creation.
let out a
But his
sharp
current
scream as
thinking
soon
and
as the
knowledge
bush
were far
asterisk
from what
T
it was
reason
like when
came
he
out of
first
his
entered
mouth.
the profession.
Zhang Lu
He
and
stared at the
shook,
sketch
and
drawing
he
and
almost
analyzed
pulled
it
the
in
door handle
detail
off.
for a moment. He slammed the
He
door
was
back
certain in
and
his
it almost
heart.
hit the tip of
Yes.
XNZ's
I
nose.
specifically talked
But no
about
matter
this
how
when I was
hard he
discussing
tried,
with
he
Mr.
couldn't
Bai
stop
and
the
the
others
sound
about
from
entering
reaching the hall
dreams,
outside.
divination, and
There
other
was no
psychic
doubt that
techniques.
Zhang Lu and
This
old
is the
face had been
magnetization
completely
effect.
thrown into the mud.
It was just like
When
how
he turned
non-magnetic
around,
materials
Zhang
could
Lu
obtain
and head was even
magnetism
a
if
little
they were
dizzy.
placed in a strong
Wright was still
magnetic
there
field for a
muttering,
long time.
Madame Yan
A person
Fen,
would
you should
also
maintain
form
your
an
strength.
effect similar to
This is a very
magnetization
long
if they
process.
lived in the environment
I've seen
for a
too
long
many
time.
people waste all
From
their
a rational
physical
strength and energy
the
before they
result
have
of
a
mental
mental
breakdown
breakdown,
was the hair,
resulting in
fingerprints,
complete loss of control of their body
trash, and
functions.
other traces left
Not to
behind
mention
in
the fact
target's
that it's
life.
not good for your life and health. The hygiene problems that come with it can
Outstanding
also
criminal
be a headache.
investigators
The
and
treasure bug
profilers
can
could
induce
use
these
but not
clues to
directly
piece together
control
a
the target's
relatively
nerve
complete
center.
image.
This is more
This
or less a
included
flaw.
emotions,
Right,
temperament,
you pervert.
lifestyle habits,
You keep
preferences,
nagging,
and so
nagging,
on.
can't you say
But
something
from a psychic's
meaningful?
perspective,
Zhang Lu
these
and was
objective
roaring in
traces
his
could
heart
be
when it
absorbed
differed
by
voice
their
poured
special
into his
clairvoyance
ear.
mode,
Then
which
why
was
not
filled
use
with
the
personal
vulcan
colors.
Not
Then
only
they
can
can
it be
achieve
reorganized
basic
and
desire
restored to a
induction
more
through pheromones,
intuitive image of
but it can
material
also
and even an
directly
answer.
mobilize the
The
neural
inner
network
world
to
called
achieve
this the
precise
magnetization
effect of
I
a
think it's
spiritual
much more
magnetic
reliable
field.
than this
It
treasure
was a
bug that
terrible
you've been
description
bragging
that was
about.
filled with
Well
pseudoscience.
said.
This
Luo
was
Nan
was
Lu
more willing
An's
to
first
call it the
reaction,
interference
but
of
in the
the
next
spiritual
moment,
core.
his mind suddenly
This
went
was a
blank.
term he
It
translated
was
from
also
the
at this
virtual
time
brain
that the
system.
door that had just
It
been
couldn't be
closed
called
directly
sincere
bounced
and
open.
elegant. The heavy
And with
solid
Wu Jun's
door
situation,
fiercely
she was
slammed into his
basically
face,
unable to reach the
causing him
level
to
of
see
Luo
stars.
Nan and Mrs. Halder,
His nose
who
and
had
mouth
formed
were
a
full of
clear
a
and
hot and
distinct
fishy
core of
smell.
concept.
The level of the
Zhang
spirit
Lu
binding
and let
core.
out a short cry
But
of
being
alarm,
able to place
his body
everyone under the
staggering
same
backwards.
standard and
The
conduct a
room
more
door
intuitive
bounced back from
comparison
his
was
face,
always more in
but it was
line with the
quickly
human
pushed
mode of
open
thinking.
again.
It looked like
Accompanying
Luo
was
Nan's condition
XNZ's
today was
long
quite
and
thin
good.
body. Then it wouldn't
His
be a
number one
bad idea to
subordinate
try
had
to
his back
back to the door and
In a
collapse.
certain sense,
His eyes
this was a
rolling back
shortcut
and
for
forth.
Rue Wen to
He was
traverse
already
through space.
unconscious.
The
The
person
person
who
who
had
had
orchestrated
the
all
digital
of this stood
pen
at the
in
door
Luo
in a
Nan's
heavy
hand
cloak.
drew on the flexible
He
screen's
knocked
work
twice
area.
on the solid wood
He
door
tried
that
to
had
add a
been
new
tossed and
element to
turned
this
back to
work,
show his
a more
politeness.
directional element.
Under the double
Maybe the
concealment
cloak
of the
would be
hood and
good.
mask,
It was
the
as if a
person's
myriad
eyes
of
were still
curtains
bright and
crisscrossed
sharp.
and flew in the air
He
before
directly
Luo
passed
Nan's
through the
eyes.
battered and
They
exhausted
extended
Zhang
into
Lu
the
and
boundless
looked at the bed,
depths, then
forming
back
a
and forth marvelous scene that Luo Nan jokingly called developer mode. This really is a professional question. This scene had a deeper level of meaning, side of the bed, Luo Nan didn't need to analyze it as if he was praising and sighing to himself. He just treated it as a kind of creative element, slowly, trying to add it to the sketch work that was nearing completion. When the door smashed into Zhang kind of stimulation, he immediately grabbed thoughts and emotions to diverge. Realizing the best use of resources, he connected them in a series of disturbances. Then he turned half his body and even directly and more complex by the door, excavated from the memories of his brain. Aren't you going to introduce yourself? It was excavated from the 500 million square kilometers of land and sea. The only flaw was that it happened to coincide with Zhang Luan's life, which was filled with blood and mucus, subjective emotions, how did you get in? Complex thoughts. Luo Nan, who was under the everything cloak, formed turned his body to let Zhang enough to crash the brain of any powerful lying in disorder in the hall. Even though Luo Nan had the external neuron to protect his body and the virtual brain system to keep watch, he wouldn't interested in Polio's mother's shop. Oh, you just relied on his intuition and I'm interested in the off-road that were close to his shop and want to swipe my card to buy. He picked a few characteristic points at random. I heard from Polio the foundation to draw a silhouette temporarily managed by Aunt Fun. The digital pen finally dropped down. I'm in a hurry, so I came directly. I came in a hurry without any prior notice. In a short few seconds, Wu Jun's portrait, which was already a blackout in the drawing area, it's easy for people to learn bad things. Hidden under the shadows. Was it because of the blackout? It was as if it was submerged by the surging waves of the sea
under the curtain of night.
In fact, the most logical action for him now was to make a move. However, when he saw his subordinates lying on the ground in the hall and thought about the few seconds of criminal time
waves
between him closing the door and being slammed in the face by the door,
significance.
his courage to make a move
used
such a marvelous method to grasp the first
then
fragment
he saw
of
the
rational
cloaked man
significance
opposite him
from the
sway.
intuitive information of the primal chaos.
Zhang Lu, and
The
was nearly
electronic
one.
pen paused
9
for a
meters
moment,
tall,
then
and
was
was
at least a
spun on
head taller
Luonan's
than the cloaked
fingertips.
man.
With
However,
this spin,
he
the
didn't have
entire
the
courage
courage
to stand in front of the cloaked
500
man.
million square
He could only
kilometers
retreat
shrunk by a
awkwardly.
third.
The
However,
source of
he didn't
information
control his
provided by
direction
the
well
billions
and
of
knocked
humans
into
and
the
billions
chest
of
of drawers
living
that he
beings
was
was
leaning
cut off
against
by at least half.
His back also
Of course,
knocked into
what
a protruding
remaining was an
corner of the
enormous
electronic
amount of
photo
information,
frame,
was
causing it to
modeled
fall
and
to the
turbid.
ground. There were
Why
no
would Zhang
meaningful
Lu
details
care
that could
about
be
such
described.
details?
But
He hurriedly
Luonan
adjusted
just
his
created
balance
some
and
sort of
turned
direction
with
for
small
them.
steps.
It was no
He
longer a
passed through the
vast
passageway
expanse of
between
haze.
the chest of drawers
Instead,
and the
it
couch
flowed
and arrived
forming
at the
a
other
general
side of the
direction and
couch.
trajectory.
Now he had
In
the
this
double
stage,
cover of
the
the couch and
information
right.
directly gathered
As for
from
what
the
he had
material
stepped
plane
on
in
and
reality
broken,
naturally
it was
completely
completely
out of his range of
position.
attention. And
But
the
after he
subjective
finished a
information
series
that
of
went through the
actions,
perception,
he discovered
thought,
that he
and
wasn't in the
processing
other's
of
range
humans
of
and other
attention
living
at all.
beings formed a
The
torrential
fluttering
turbid
cloak was
flow that
merely an
surged
effect
forth.
of the furnace.
The turbid
Taking
flow
out
did
the
not
card
flow in the
terminal.
direction of
This
north,
person had
south,
really brought the
east,
terminal
or
from
west.
Wu Jun's shop.
It did not surge
He
up
held
and
it in
down.
his hand and shook
Instead,
it a few times.
it followed the special dimension of the human heart.
He was still leaning
It
against
rushed
the
forward
door,
under the
his gaze
relatively
returning to the
restricted
direction of the
external
couch.
environmental
Yen
conditions.
Fun, who was
It was
suffering
also
from
at
the
this
piercing
stage that the
torment of
guiding
the treasure
strength of the
bug
virtual brain
clenched her
system's
teeth
rules
again.
toward Luonan
At the same
weakened.
time, she
The
tried
wraith
hard to
sign
turn
in
her
the
head,
depths of the void
hoping to see the
spontaneously
person who had brought
brought
such a huge
wantonly
change at the
swimming
door.
within the turbid
Even
flow
if
of
she
the
couldn't
human
do it,
heart.
she had to use some
Luonan's
method to
eyebrows
remind the
jumped
other of the
lightly.
great danger
If this
hiding
were
in a
4
certain
months ago,
corner of the room.
he would not have furrowed
However,
his
her
brows
throat
no matter
was
how the
tightly
wraith
clasped
sign
by
leaped.
right.
But
The
after
back and
discovering
forth
the
friction
abyssal
between her
sun disc,
laryngeal bone and
Luonan could
laryngeal
not help
canal
but
blocked
ponder
her
every
breathing
time the wraith
passages and
sign
blood
acted
vessels,
spontaneously,
making her consciousness
then again,
even
there was
more
no
fuzzy.
point in pondering.
In a daze,
Could
she heard
Luonan
Wright
shield
low
himself
horse
from the
laughter.
influence of the
Card
abyssal
payment?
sun? Looks
The
like
answer
you have
was
an
no.
impatient temper.
In reality,
how much
is that
Luonan
car?
had endured the heat
There was no
conduction of the
response from
abyssal
inside
sun
the
disk
room.
every moment
Wright
of the
was
past 4
displeased.
months.
I'm
Although
asking
he
you,
would
Zhang
ignore
Lu,
this heat conduction
how much
most
is
of the
that
time
off-road
due to the
vehicle?
difference in degree,
Zhang
this
Lu
objective
had
fact
already been
existed on the
reduced to a mouse
subjective
in the
mental
bellows.
plane.
He
It
was
still
completely
existed
unable
in a
to keep
powerful
up with the
anchoring
tempo
manner.
of these two people.
This was especially
He could
true
only
when
rely on
Luonan
his instincts to
temporarily
speak.
abandoned the virtual brain system
I
to
think it's
explore the
3,000
mysteries of the
transaction
turbid
points.
flow of the human heart. This
Pineapple
influence
said
was
to give
even
me a
more
10%
direct
discount
in
to
this
express
sense,
his gratitude.
Luonan had taken the
Wright
initiative
sighed
to
in
step into the
admiration.
domain of the
What a
abyssal
forthright
sun disk.
child.
He
Then
went
it's
to
300
observe and learn
points.
the rules and
Just give
laws
it
that
to him.
affected the control of
but
emotions and desires.
How could Zhang Lu,
Since that was
and
the
be
case,
willing
there
to
was
step
nothing more
forward
to
and
say.
throw his life away?
Luonan's subtle
He
state
still
of
wanted
mind
to
was like a
resist,
drop
but
of
Wright
water
tilted
thrown
his
into
body
the
to
sun.
the side.
It evaporated
His
without a
ice-cold
trace
and
in an
emotionless
instant.
gray-blue
Eyes cut over, letting Zhang Lu and understand that if he
Correspondingly,
dared to
he
say the
calmly
word
accepted
no,
the heat
the
that
next
came
one
from
to
the
lie
abyss
down
sun
as a
wheel.
corpse would be
He
him.
went a step
Zhang
further to
Lu
experience
moved
the
out
vague
step by
loss
step
behind the heat.
His speed was
It was at
touching.
this moment that a
Wright
great
didn't
sun
pay any
leapt
more
out of the
attention to
boundless
him.
turbid ocean.
He turned around to
radiating
face scorching
Luonan.
light and heat.
We can
as well as
properly
even
discuss
more
the problem
penetrative
of the
and even
control
destructive
center.
power to
You
every
mentioned the
level of the
Vulcan ant
turbid
just
ocean
now.
in the human
It
heart.
really was a very
Some
professional
emotions and
suggestion.
desires were instantly
Frankly speaking,
vaporized.
the laboratory
Some
here
were
has
blown
indeed
into
done a
pieces
few
and lost all
experiments.
meaning on all levels.
However, this sort of social
there were
species
still some
suffers
that,
too many
under the
interference
bombardment
and
influences
influences
from the
energy,
social model,
revealed
the
information
information
that
was
was
also
previously
previously hidden
problem.
even deeper.
Luonan
The
tossed
turbid
the
swipe
swipe card
which had been
terminal and
chaotic in the first place
responded
became even more
worker
chaotic.
ants and soldier ants are
However,
indeed like
under
this.
the powerful
Then
blast
we'll
of the
just
abyss sun
directly
wheel,
control the ant
the
queen.
meaningless and
I've
low-level
heard that brain
information was
demon
almost
Wright is a
wiped out.
top-notch master
What was left
hypnotist.
was the
I
marvelous
look
water
forward to
plants
your
and floating
performance.
objects. Hiss. Cat Eyes woke up from her nightmare once more.
Chapter 717.
The shadow of the human
There was no need for
arachnid was
Luonan to
annihilated
answer
within the
meaningless
brilliant
questions.
sun disk.
As for Wright,
However,
his
his gaze
crisscrossing
spun a few
chains
times
became
on the
even
cloak
more
outside
twisted and taut.
His soul
There was
strength
even a
attempted
chain
to
that
penetrate
clutched
on
her
the
neck,
mental plane,
dragging her
her along with the vast and boundless chains and spiderweb into the depths of the turbid current. In this world who could break through his cage and pry into his foundation, entangling countless impurities and trash of the wilderness. Of course, there were some catches. On the other hand, that Cat Eyes could not understand. A few times from she herself was one of the catches. He more or less figured out that she had long since been bound to it. If one were to refer to the society's and no matter how much Cat Eyes struggled within the turbid flow, then right soul no matter how deep she was ordinary level, the intense light of the four indicators of brilliant sun wheel would always sensitivity and affinity. It reached far and wide. Many people proposed to change depth to degrees of freedom by layer, causing her already extremely fragile. This was the level of just touching upon the abyss region and boil over together with the impatient emotions at the bottom of her heart. His accumulation couldn't be said to be robust. Cat Eyes felt Luonan's but in terms of sensitivity, it was not very lively and nimble. Instead, it was focused on all things within the turbid observation mode. It was focused on all the distorted and fragmented images and domain of electromagnetic waves that was gaze was dignified and cold. There were
blended
rich
together
switching
with the
variations,
powerful light of the
and
sun
this was
disk,
precisely the
dictating
active
the
range
life
of
and
human
death of all
brainwaves.
things within the
The
turbid
mental
ocean.
activities of
He
quite
was
a few
aloof and
animals
remote
and
like a
mutants could
god.
also be included
Cat
in
Eyes
this
was
domain.
unfortunate.
Looking
This
at
was
Yen
because
Fen's
she
specific
understood the
case,
source of
it was
all
just as
unforeseen
Cat Eyes
events
had
more
given him.
clearly than the
This
ignorant
wanted criminal
existence
was
of
a
a
master
master.
hypnotist.
Therefore, she
His
was the
techniques were
equivalent of
skilled.
looking directly
If he
at a
hadn't
god.
arrived in time,
She endured
Yen
an
Fen
even
would have
deeper
long
level
since
of
been brought
destructive
into a
pressure.
situation of
However,
extreme
Cat
fear
Eyes
and
was
despair.
fortunate.
Her
At the
mind
very
would have
least,
collapsed.
she was within the
That
scope
was
of the
all.
rules of this
Luo
grand
Nan
system.
evaluated right
She was
strength
close
as
to a
being
god,
his mind.
possessing a bit of the
This
right
person
to
was
pray or
able to
beg.
control people's minds and hypnotize
Cat
living
Eye's
beings.
breathing was still
He could
heavy
do
for a
many
long time
inconceivable
after she
things,
woke up,
but he didn't
it was
seem
the
to
same
be the
as
type
every
who
time
excelled
after
in
a
combat.
nightmare.
Speaking of which, Wright's posture was really quite stylish.
Her clothes were completely
Was he a frog in
drenched,
a well?
and the
Or
bedsheet
did he
beneath
have
her was
something
not
to
able
rely
to
on?
escape from misfortune.
On the other side,
a
Wright
large
muttered
amount
to
of
himself
heat was
for a
lost,
bit after
and the
several
mental
fruitless
exhaustion
probing
was
attempts.
10 times.
The
a
smile
hundred
on
times
his face
greater.
grew lively
He
once
caused
more.
her to hover on
He
the brink
appeared to
of
be more
collapse.
interested in the
She
topic
wasn't
of the
even willing
Vulcan
to
ant.
get up.
He made
She
a
just
further
raised her
discussion.
eyelids with great
This, Mr.
difficulty
Furness,
and looked at the ceiling.
I believe that your
Her
following
vision was
statement
completely
needs to be
unfocused.
discussed.
Instead,
In the Vulcan
He
Ant
Yuan's
Society,
words
the
from the
queen
early
is a
hours
pure
of the
leader.
morning echoed
Her
in her
specific
ears.
functions can't
He is
compare to
currently
her
probing
people.
the world.
And the
What
pheromones
he
he
probed
probed out
out
was
was
a
the
Vulcan
storm that
ant
stirred the
individual
world.
can't compare to
He
that
that
of the
wasn't
myriad
stirring.
treasures bug.
It was a calamity.
Luo Nan answered
Unknowingly,
straightforwardly.
the angle of the
One
sunlight
is
from
one.
the outside
One
world
is a
had
nest.
shifted.
Of course,
It shone
he couldn't
through the
do it
gap
like
in
the
the treasure
curtains and
bug,
fell on
but
the end
wouldn't
of
it
the
be
bed,
better to use the
forming a
queen
bright
as a
edge of
remote
light.
control?
It also
Multiple
lightly stuck
connections
to her
group
smooth
controlled
calves,
just like a
bringing
normal
a slight
Vulcan ant
warmth.
nest.
Cat Eyes
This
instinctively
idea is
twitched.
very interesting.
Her calves shrunk back. She could not help
However,
but
I
recall
hope
the
that there are more
reality of her
solid
nightmare.
steps.
The memory
Wright was
was somewhat
being illuminated
disappointed
by the radiant
No matter
sun.
how beautiful the
Unfathomable
proposal
and
was,
pervasive.
it could only be described
It was easy
as
to
braggy
find adjectives,
if there was
but
no
the
substantive
experience of
entry
being
point.
penetrated,
In
of
that
being
case, there
peeled
was nothing
open,
to talk
of
about.
having no privacy
His
from the
eyes
inside
slanted
to
to
the
the
other
outside,
side, of having
It
no
was said
cover
that
at
a
all.
certain person
Even
looked
the
tall
most
and
basic
strong,
of self-esteem
but when he
was
walked,
unbearable.
he couldn't even be
You
compared to
bastard
an
who
old lady
bites the
with
hand
brown
that
feet.
feeds you.
Was it going
Cat
to take
Eye's
until
little
tomorrow to
favorable
finish?
impression of Luo
Being
Nan had only
penetrated
been
by Wright's
separated by
ice
2
cold gaze
nights,
a second
but it
time,
had turned to
Zhang
ashes
Liuan
under the
truly
roasting
felt
of the
as if there was a
sunlight.
blade on his
Of
back.
course, she definitely
His
would
feet
not
instinctively
keep these words
sped
bottled
up,
up
and
in
then he
her heart.
arrived.
Cat Eyes
Zhang
simply
dialed
and
Luo
nostrils
Nan's
started to
hexier
ache
number
again when he
threw
reached
these
the
words
very
over
close
and hung
standard
up
again.
in an instant.
In fact,
Luo
half of his
Nan
face was
responded
still
in an
smeared
instant,
with blood.
taking the initiative
He
to
didn't
call
even
back.
need to look in the mirror
Sister
to
Cat
know that
Eyes,
he
are
must
you
be
okay?
in a very sorry
Even
state.
though it was the psychic
He didn't
wave
have any
network,
idea what
there
was
were
going
some
on.
things that could not be
He
said too
floated
clearly
around,
on this
his
public
voice
line.
trembling slightly.
Cat Eyes responded
Furness Elder,
snappily,
sir.
"Don't bother me.
Can I operate
Then
the
she
car
hung
terminal?
up. Luo Nan was well
course.
behaved.
His
Luo Nan
revenge was
extended his
basically a
hand and
success.
handed the terminal
But
over.
why was it that his
He waited for
revenge,
Zhang
which
Liuan
was
to
supposed
take
to be
it,
a form
then
of
he suddenly
venting,
laughed,
carried with it a
Polio is so
wondrous
straightforward.
excitement?
You're his
and even
temporary
an
guardian,
inflated
so you
sense of
shouldn't fall
accomplishment.
behind.
Bastard.
How about you give me a discount
Cat Eyes
as well?"
cursed once more.
She pounded
Okay.
the bed, but
Actually,
in the end, the
she still
transaction
crawled
points
up.
I obtained from
She
my credit
fiercely
rating
pulled the
are only
curtains tight,
328
not letting
points.
a single bit of light
It's
leak
quite
through.
painful to have them
Only then
deducted
did she
all
go
at
and
once.
freshen up.
It wouldn't
A
be a
hot bath
problem
really
if it was
did
just
help
a
soothe the
fraction.
mind.
Cat
How about
Eyes at least
28?
had the
I'll
appetite to
continue
eat
with the
breakfast by the
discount.
time she came out of
Zhang
the
Lu,
bathroom and revealed
she
an
also
awkward and
skimmed through the
helpless
news in
smile.
passing.
He was
There were no
completely confused
surprises.
by Luo Nan's
Aside
words.
from 2 or 3
Next, he
authoritative
could only
news
stare
platforms that
blankly at
maintained
Luo
a bit of
Nan as he
modesty,
took out the metal
the
card
various media
representing the
apps,
transaction
forums, and
voucher,
discussion
lightly
groups of
pasted
all
it
sizes
onto the
of the
card
inner
terminal.
world
Had already been
So it's
overrun
like
by
this.
gossip such as
That's right.
Luo Nan secretly did a
moment.
paternity test.
Zhang Lu
or became a
finally
father at
remembered
16.
the basic operation.
The corner of
But
Cat
at this
Eye's
stage,
lips
he only
twitched,
had
but she
this bit
still
of
did not
instinct
laugh.
left.
He completely followed Luo Nan's instructions.
Indeed,
and
there was
entered the
nothing funny
insincere
about
number
it.
28.
This was because
A
Cat
beep
Eyes
rang
and
out,
other
and
women
the
who
card
had a
terminal
close
was
relationship with
successfully
Luo
swiped.
Nan were all within the
Zhang
scope
Lu
of the
and
sputtering
subconsciously
attacks.
glanced at the
Aside
display
from Cat
screen.
Eyes, Zhang
The basic
Yinyan and
information
even Wayne
related
were
to the
caught up in
furnace
these
was
rumors.
displayed on it. They were all
It was
spread
also
the basic and some of them were even transactions and employment photos and various vagrant exchanges such as titles such as Master Luo's harem actually became rampant for a time. Thanks to the genius teacher why he blurted out these words. Actually had the momentum to become an internet celebrity of the inner world overnight. I heard that it was invented by the leader of Wuxia if you have the guts. Oh my, he's also a high-profile character. There was no need to blindly take photos. Was quite big and there were plenty of photos and videos. Twitched. During this time, he suddenly understood why received messages of comfort and ridicule from her circle of friends one after another. Information on the she was basically unperturbed by this. From her perspective, if she really had to be tossed around like last night from time to time, the answer he obtained then it would just better for money being swiped in. There was no sincerity to speak of. But before she could even tidy up, that can knock down 10 people in an instant, and
new
at the same
message
time
was sent over,
be able to
and it came
completely
from
block
Luo
out
Nan.
the changes in the
Cat
surrounding
Eyes received
atmosphere.
it, and her eyelids twitched.
Dogs hit
It was a
fleshly
form,
side,
and the title
this
was
Mr. Furness's
Paternity
only
Relationship
mental side.
Appraisal Opinion.
Nonsense, I
All
can guess
right.
it too.
After eliminating the
Zhang Lu
meaningless
and
standard
silently
phrases
cursed,
and the long
and
list
Luo
of
Nan's
gene
line of
loci,
sight followed
the final
Wright's
analysis
explanation
and
at this
appraisal
time.
results were
He
meaningful.
turned to look at Zhang
The
Lu's
DNA
side.
typing of samples
Zhang
A
Lu
and B at the 20
instinctively
ST
revealed the
loci
hearty smile
tested
he
this
normally
time is
wore when
unable to
socializing.
detect homologous
But his
hereditary
current state
genes.
of mind could only
This does not
seriously
conform
deform
to the
his
laws
facial
of
expression.
Mendelian inheritance.
Even he himself felt
According to the
embarrassed.
results of the
Zhang
DNA
Lu
genetic marker typing,
Wright's
it
deep
does
and
not
low
support
voice
the
suddenly
existence
came
of a
from
blood
behind him.
relationship between
Zhang Lu
sample A and sample
subconsciously
B.
quivered.
This was great.
He wanted to turn
All
his
the
head,
holes in
but
one's
his mind
imagination
suddenly
were
went
slack
blank
to death in the blink
Wright's
of an
words
eye.
from just now
Cat
reappeared
Eyes
in his
whistled,
mind,
but before her
bullshit
voice could
fleshly
fall,
side.
the other side had
It can
already
only be the
retracted
mental
the
side.
message.
Hold
What
on,
came
the
next
mental
was
side.
an awkward emoticon.
This fellow is a
I
mental
sent it
side.
wrong.
Then
I
his
should have
close
sent it to
combat
my friends
ability
and
should
family
be
to
quite
prove
weak.
my innocence.
Also, I'm a genuine fleshly side,
Eyes
and my
was stunned.
combat ability is
She was really
top-notch.
unable to match
Now
this
that the
awkward
distance is
emoticon
within
and
reach,
message with the
isn't
cold
this a
and
great
dignified
opportunity?
gaze from last night.
And at this time,
Is there really
he saw
nothing
the
wrong
gaze
with
of
the
the
furnace
furnace
shift in Wright's
Is there something
direction?
wrong with me?
Just as it
Her
was about
thoughts
to
flowed
turn,
absent-mindedly.
this was the best opportunity.
Only after a long while
Sure
did she
he'd
reply
strike.
with a
The
perfunctory,
high-speed flow
"What
of
a pity."
thoughts instantly
This
pieced
could be
together
considered
into
her
a seemingly
usual
reliable
attitude
chain.
of taking pleasure
It was
in
like
other
some sort
people's
of transmission
misfortune.
device that
The other
spurred
side
Zhang
instantly
Luan's body,
replied with another
including
message,
the courage and
but this
gamble
time
that
it was
was
suppressed
suppressed
in
in
the
the
deepest
deepest
depths of his
The
heart.
center of the image
Zhang
seemed to
Lu
be that of a
An's
woman
mind heated up,
but the shadows
He
of the
stamped
lines
his
were
feet,
smeared
lifted
away.
his hips,
All that
twisted
was
his
left was
waist,
a
and
faint
threw a blurry
punch.
silhouette.
He borrowed
And
the
behind
good
this
position
blurry
of standing
silhouette,
sideways
there
next
was
to
a
the
technique
furnace
of
to unleash a
perspective.
left swing
The
fist.
depth of the image
biting
was
towards his
realized,
target's
and another
waist and
silhouette
kidneys
was like a
outlined.
poisonous dragon. With the current distance between the two,
As for why
Zhang
she
Lu's
noticed
fist
it,
had just
it was
exerted
because
force
Luo
when
Nan
the
had
tip of his
deliberately
fist had
marked the
already reached
silhouette.
the edge of the cloak.
It looked like.
Then the fist drilled inexorably inside. Hit. Zhang Lu, and could already feel the side muscles of his
Chapter
opponent's waist from the
725.
feedback of his
The
fist.
psychic drawing.
He seized the opportunity
after
to
tossing
twist his
and turning
fist.
for an entire
He wanted
night,
to use
this
all
was
of
what
his
came
strength
out.
to smash his
Cat
opponent's
Eyes
internal
endured the
organs
loathsome
into
mush,
mush. As she headed
but in
west
that
from her
moment,
home in
his
the city
twisting
center,
fist only
she
tossed
crossed
and turned
several
in the
hundred
empty air
kilometers
behind
to
the cloak.
arrive at the black
At the
market
same
in the
time,
outskirts
a
of the
figure
satellite
flashed
city of
before his
Wuxia
eyes.
City, Mangzhou. Just by
All of
relying
this
on the
was thanks
instincts
to
of a
Luo
fighter,
Nan and his
Luo
latest
Nan
work.
was able to
She had
determine
not
that his
forgotten that
opponent's
she had
feet should
fallen
be
into
across
this
pit
step.
in the first place
Luo
because of
Nan
this
went
damn
against the
psychic
direction
drawing.
of his fist
A
and
certain
made a
someone
graceful
actually had the
dodge.
face to
An
ask her to
expert.
come out and
This
scout for
thought jumped
information.
out in Zhang Lu
What did he
An's
mean
mind,
by
but
it
he was
involves
unable
the
to
black
correct
market?
his instinctive
It's not
driving
good to
force.
disturb Sister Yuan. It was clearly revenge.
He could only follow the
Revenge.
predetermined path
She
of
was
judgment.
muddle-headed. I can't
Why
let
didn't
the
she
distance
smash the
between
drawing
me and
into
the
that
spirit.
fellow's face back
This
then?
thought was so strong that
She couldn't
Zhang
hit
Lu
him
even
even
if
if
she
she
did.
exploded with a bang.
Ungrateful,
He completely
despicable
lost
demon,
his follow-up
shameless to
plan.
the extreme,
Instead,
still trying
with
to
an
act innocent
absolutely
after getting a
unorthodox
bargain.
movement,
In
his
any
body
case,
lunged
Luo Nan
forward.
couldn't hear it. His other arm
Even if he
also
did,
stretched
Cat Eyes
out
wouldn't
and
care.
forcefully wrapped
So
around
all
the
sorts
furnace's
of
waist
negative
and
adjectives
abdomen.
and adjectives
Even if he
piled up
couldn't
like
hug
they
it,
were free.
he had to grab
It
the
would be
furnace's
best if she
cloak.
could crush that
He
bastard
had to
to death.
restrict this person's
Cat
movements.
Eyes kept cursing in
As
her
for
mind.
what to do after that,
At the same
it was
time, she
completely
didn't
out
forget
of
to
Zhang
memorize
Lu
all
An's
sorts of
consideration.
details on the psychic
Perhaps
drawing,
Zhang Lu,
especially
An's
the outline of the
unorthodox
cruise ship.
movement had some
Luo Nan
unexpected
said that he
results.
had blindly drawn
In
it
the
based
next
on his
instant, he
feelings,
really did
but
manage
this
to
was a
grab the
psychic
middle of the
drawing.
cloak. With Luo
Both
Nan's
of their
current
figures
fame,
froze.
there would probably
Next.
be plenty of
What should
people
I do
fighting
next?
over it if he were to take
Zhang
it out
Lu
for auction.
and was suddenly stunned.
The location of
He
the cruise
completely
ship on
didn't
the drawing
understand
is
how
too
the
far
situation
away.
had turned
Plus,
out this way.
Its silhouette
It
from
was
the
also
side
at this moment
feels
that
like
Wright,
it's very
who had
high
been
up.
speaking in a
The
low
top
and drawn
deck
out
has many
tone,
wing-like
suddenly
silhouettes.
let out a sharp
They
whistle.
might be antennas,
At the side
bridges,
of the
and the
room,
like. A layer of blurry
Cat
stone
Eyes,
powder
whose mind
and
was
water
busy,
mist suddenly
finally
splashed
stepped
out
into
from
the
the
vagrant
stone wall
trade
structure
center
known
known
as
as
the
originally
Wild
part
Inn.
of the natural
The
karst
style
cave,
of this cave-like
blurring
building
people's
was
vision.
closer to the
A
original
ferocious
ecology.
flathead the size
There
of
were
half a
fewer
human
customers
passed through
during
the
the
side
day,
of the stone
so the
wall.
owner took the
Wrapped in a misty water mist, deliver goods.
It opened its bloody
This place
mouth
was
that
more like a
similar
freight
to
yard than a
crocodile's.
hotel.
Biting
The bar
towards
on
the
the
direction
first
where
floor
the
lay
tavern
in the
was
furnace
only
were
open in the
entangled.
corners around the
Giant
bar
salamander,
counter.
the pet of
The
the
lighting
brain
was
demon.
deliberately dimmed.
Zhang
The
and still
atmosphere
remembered that
implied
it
the
was this
transactions
monster that
came
had
out,
seriously
but
injured
whether or
and
not it
subdued
had
the
any
skilled
practical
Yen Fin in the blink of
significance
an
was
eye when
another
he had
matter.
jumped back.
At the very
The
least,
strength
for
was
the mental
extremely
cat
strong.
eyes, she could pretty
And
much
now
see
this
the overall
cooperation was
layout
also
and all the minute
seamless.
changes after
Wait, I'm
entering the
also in the
tavern.
attack range.
Oh, is this
Zhang
too
Lu
coincidental or
and
too
suddenly sobered
unfortunate?
up.
His
Around
mind
the
was
bar
even more
counter,
agile
there
than
were a
usual.
few private
In
booths
an
pieced
instant, he
together by
understood the
high-back
role he had
sofas.
played in this
The
series
seats
of
were more or
actions.
less full,
Even
and
the
they were all
reason why he was
conversing
so
in low
fearless
voices.
was also
Cat eyes
clear and
walked in
obvious.
casually.
He inevitably
screamed,
drawing
"Right,
everyone's
you."
attention.
What followed was an
Most
even
people
sharper
only
hissing
raised their
sound.
eyes and quickly
Zhang Lu
focused on
and
their
felt
own
his
matters.
body float up,
And then he was thrown out by a terrifying force.
Only the innermost
and the
side
place
of the
where the
room
force
was a
was
little old
applied
man
was
who
its
happened to be
extended
facing
right
the
arm.
outside.
He winked at her and bared his teeth. Cat Eyes responded
Chapter
with a
7:18.
wink. She casually pointed to
and
the bar
screamed
counter
loudly.
beside her,
His blood flow
indicating
had
that
sped
they
up
should
due
each
to him
do
gathering
his
his
energy and
The
exerting
stooped,
his strength.
lazy, and
A large
spiritless
open
little old
wound
man was
suddenly
none other
appeared,
than
and his situation
turned
for the
veteran
worse.
psychic.
Blood
At the
sprayed
same
out
time,
from the
he was
ruptured
also
part
an
of his
expert in
flesh and
soul
blood.
studies, Mr.
The
Bai.
enormous pain
They
and
were all
fear that followed
acquaintances and
directly
friends.
smashed his
The more
mental
it was like
defenses.
this, the more
His
they would
entire
pay
face
attention to
contorted
protecting
to the
each
limit,
other's
and he even
privacy.
began to tear
Under
up.
such circumstances,
What
a simple
terrible
greeting
execution.
was enough.
On the
As
other
Wright
hand,
lamented,
the person sitting
the giant
opposite
salamander
Mr. White
that had
deliberately
mistakenly
turned his
struck
head
him
and
was
looked at them a
greedy.
few times.
Its thick and
Cat
fat
Eyes
body
only
came
felt
over
that the fellow looked
horizontally,
familiar,
occupying
but she
nearly
couldn't
half
recall
the
who he
space
was
between
for
the
a
bed
moment.
and the door.
She simply
It
ignored
also
him.
blocked between
She
Wright
then
and
sat in
Luo
front of the
Nan,
bar
becoming
counter.
a solid barrier.
Blood energy refill.
Luo Nan avoided
This
the
was
fatal
both a
attack in the nick
consumption
of
and a
time
secret
and shook his
signal.
head under his
Using
cloak.
an expensive
Then he
drink
looked
like
at the rock
blood
wall that
energy
the giant
that
salamander
required
had drilled
honor
out
points
from.
indicated that
The
I
wall
needed
had
high-end
undergone some
services
renovations
from the inner
so it
world.
could be considered
In the
smooth
wild
and
and
flat.
Such
There
high-end
weren't any
services were
holes that could
usually
allow a
information.
monster of that size
As
to
for
pass through.
refill, it
There were only
indicated
a
that
few
I had an
traces of
account
wetness.
here.
I
It was
also
similar
made
to
an
the wall
appointment.
passing
The
technique.
purpose was
It
clear.
was a bidirectional
Don't try to fool
distortion
me
of
with
the
low-end
giant
stuff.
and the semi-void.
The bartender revealed
No, there
a
should be another
professional
ability.
smile.
It looks
He
like you
quickly
really
took
are
out
a
a sealed
fleshly
cup of
body.
blood energy
The level
from
of
the
your ability
expensive
is
and
quite
sturdy
surprising.
safe beside him and placed
Wright
it
was
on a
still
tray.
speaking in a slow
Aside
and
from
unhurried
blood
manner
energy,
like a boss.
there was also
With
a
the strength
small
he used to
flexible
grip
screen on the
Yenfen's
tray.
throat had clearly
A
increased.
series of items were
Luo
listed on
Nan's
the
side.
screen.
You've
Cat
said so
Eyes
much
finished
nonsense.
scanning the items
This
on the
giant
flexible
salamander
screen
of
in the
yours is
time it
about
took
to
her to
breathe its
open the
last.
packaging.
I learned
She
in
then rolled
biology
her
class
eyes.
that the
You guys are going
tetrodotoxin
to go
contained in the
bankrupt here,
salamander
right?
is insoluble in water.
The time to make
If you
an
want to
appointment
spray
is
a
a bit
poisonous
short.
mist,
I
you probably
understand
have
that
to
you didn't
use
make
its
enough
acidic bodily
preparations,
fluids to
but you
neutralize
don't
it.
need to use
It's hard
information
enough
from a
to do
week
this
ago
over
to
and
trick
over
me.
again. Also, you can count these
Biology
two small
class?
dinghies as cruises. One is never
Can
too
your
old to
family's
learn.
cruises enter an
Wright's
underground
gaze
river?
roamed over Luo Nan's
The bartender's
cloak. He
professional
didn't linger
smile
on this
crumbled
topic,
a bit.
but who knew what he was
didn't
thinking?
wait for Cat Eyes
2
to
seconds
respond when
later,
a figure
Wright
came over
returned
and
to
knocked on the
communication
counter,
mode,
It
indicating
was
for
as
the
if
bartender to get
hypnotizing
lost.
Zhang Lu and to mount
Don't
a
embarrass
sneak
yourself
attack
here.
and pouring neurotoxin
Consider
into the
today's
room
pay
had
your
never
training
happened.
fee. Go work
This
hard.
giant salamander
The bartender
doesn't
was a
satisfy
bit
me.
stunned. This is
Young
why I
Master
don't like
Zone,
the karst
go,
caves
go,
of
go.
Spring City. I'm going to
There are
chat with
far
my
too
friend.
few mutants here that
As
are
he
suitable
spoke,
to be
the person who
controlled.
just came over
At the
laughed
beginning
and
of the
greeted,
aberration
"Oh,
era,
my little
this
cat,
karst
long
cave
time
was
no
one of the
see.
first areas
You just
to fall
came out of
into
the
enemy
hospital.
hands.
Did you
However,
get your
because it
alimony
attracted
payment?
the most attention,
It was this fellow who
cleaned
had
out
been talking
early
with
on and
Mr.
became
by
the
just now.
isolation zone
He
between
even
Spring
turned his
City
head
and
to
the
size her
wilderness.
up. Then
Cat
it was
Eyes
filled with
lifted her
people like
eyelids
Zhang
and
Lu,
swept her
and
gaze over the person's
Zhang Lu
face twice.
and had already fainted
She finally
due to
remembered
massive
who this
bleeding,
round-faced
pain,
and
fear,
slightly plump
so he
brother
couldn't
was.
hear this
She
evaluation.
didn't say anything.
Wright only said it casually, and the focus of the topic quickly jumped to
picked up
Zhang
the
Lu
blood
and his
energy
wife.
drink
and flipped her hand to pour it over.
Holy
Maybe
crap.
tetrodotoxin is
That
useless
person
to you,
suddenly
but I really
flipped
want to
over.
know.
Can
His
you
figure
stop
could
this
barely
lady
be
from
considered
absorbing the
nimble,
same toxin?
but he was still
In
splashed
the previous
on his shoulder, and the
experiments,
corner of
my
his head
control
by
of
the
the
dosage
dosage
was
was
relatively
relatively
accurate.
He
But
cut
seeing
an
you
extremely
here,
sorry
it's too
figure for a
difficult for me
time.
to control the
Cat Eyes
dosage in
didn't follow
milligrams.
up with an attack.
Of course, it's not
She
easy
only
to
said,
control the
"It's
power in your
yours.
hands."
It's
On
mine,
the
it's
bed,
mine.
Yenfen's
It's
face
mine."
had already turned
That
purple,
person accepted
and
the
she
towel
began
the
to
waitress
convulse due
handed
to a
over.
severe lack of
He
oxygen.
hastily wiped his
The
face twice
neurotoxin
and
had
was
already
willing to
weakened
accept
her
his
ability to
punishment.
breathe,
Someone
and now
who
that
could
lighter
speak
was
to Cat
clutching her
Eyes like
throat,
this was
all
indeed
of
an
her breathing
acquaintance.
channels had been
It
cut
could
off.
barely be
She
considered
was
a
about
friend.
to reach her limit.
Young Master Zone's
Luo
name
Nan
was
obviously
Zone Yun.
knew that this was
He
a
was
threat,
also a
but he
registered
didn't
member of the
immediately
Sia City
respond.
branch.
It seemed
Plus,
that
he
he
had a
was
good
weighing the
father.
pros and cons.
He
Right
was one of the
maintained his
branch's
smile.
3B rank
Why don't
fleshly
we get to the
bodies.
bottom of things?
He was the combat
Just who are
master,
you?
Mr. Zone
What's your
G,
relationship
who was
with the
famous
Sia
for his
Luo cult?
perfect rotation.
I haven't seen you
Although
in the data,
Zone Yun had
and you
learned
don't
from
seem
his
to fit in
family,
with this sort
Zone
of
Yun was a
low-level
wanderer.
cult that holds a
He
tattered
didn't have
cloak
many
like a treasure.
accomplishments in the
Are
field
you
of
Wu
combat
Jun's friend?
techniques. Lover?
He stumbled and barely
Mercenary?
crossed the C-rank barrier. I see
He had an
injustice on the
identity in
road,
the
and I draw
society,
my
so
blade
he
to
put
help.
all his enthusiasm
enthusiasm
okay?
into the world of sensual pleasures.
That's a really annoying
He
answer.
flew all over the world all year
I also
round.
feel that there's too
He
much
spent
nonsense
very little
between
time in
us.
Xia City.
But right now I
All
hold
right,
the
back in the
initiative.
day, this brother
You should
also
answer.
chased after Cat
What are you
Eyes.
going to do?
But one time,
Your
as an
mission has
assistant,
failed, and
he
you're still
personally
asking me what to
demonstrated the
do.
magic of being
Luo
pierced
Nan
through
leaned
the anus
against
by
the
a
wall to
flying
the
needle.
side of the door and
After
chatted
that,
with Right.
he kept a respectful
He casually
distance
said
from
a few
Cat
words
Eyes.
of mockery.
Please
You can't
forgive
get
me for
hold of
today's
Boss
matter.
June's weakness.
Last time,
and the rebels
that
who
base from the
cooperated
Order of
with you have
Justice
all
went
been
crazy
crazy
with
with
alcohol.
Aside
He
from
brought a
grabbing
bunch
a
of
woman's
people and
throat
pretty much
showing
massacred
off,
this place.
what other use do you
The
have?
experienced ones
If I
either
were your
died or
boss,
fled.
I would certainly
We,
deduct
the
your
ones who
entire
took
year's
over, were
salary and
helpless.
funds.
Cat
Then
Eyes
I'd raised
say,
an eyebrow.
"Don't let me see you
You're
again."
here, little
That
boss.
would vent my anger.
Little boss.
This was an
Participating in
imitation
the
of
stock
Zhang
market for
Yingying's
fun.
tone of voice.
Let my old man
Though it was
feel at
usually
ease.
quite noisy,
Oh,
the effect
then
here
I
was
wish you
quite
good
decent.
fortune.
The smile on Wright's face remained over the simple and crude furnishings of the cave. And colder. She gave him some auspicious words without any sincerity. The more convincing reason was that his preparations in the abyss region were more or less complete. It doesn't have much of a future. I'm counting on my old friend to take care of me. An awkward conversation. Zhong Yun fawningly delivered Wright really wasn't a combat type ability user. Of course it was free. But his brain was still quite good. If it weren't for my old man getting angry, he had completed a complex set of multiple layers of cover even if tense atmosphere. If I had the spare time, I could have run to Ban City, or unfortunately it was still too small shop. As long as I could make money from both sides, this sort of cliché I might be able to shake it up in 2 years. Still fit his aesthetic standards. But here, when I think of the three heavyweights and that he was wearing a disguised glove on his hand, my heart trembles. His posturing had failed, so he could only let out a muffled fart on his fingertips. This was also a vagabond trading house. He was extremely embarrassed. Disregarding the 3 typical examples that Zhong Yun had mentioned, of his fingers as a signal. It was not without reason that Spring City had become a market, but this place was a wild inn. The vast majority of vagabond trading houses made money, including the Wild Inn. But this sort of black market that wandered on the fringes of multi-layered society inevitably faced a considerable degree of competition. Its greatest competitor was the internal resource market of the ability user associations and other inner-world organizations. Within a large metropolitan area, the ability user associations, secret orders, and other large organizations didn't need to look at reports or look at industries. They only needed to look at whether or not the vagabond trading houses and similar black markets in the vicinity were flourishing or not. The relationship between the two was clearly inversely proportional. At the very least, at the extraordinary level, the more resources a branch of the society or secret orders controlled, the stronger their control over the city, and the smaller the space for the black market to survive. On the other hand, if the large organizations were poorly managed or intentionally connived, or if there were many organizations competing and keeping each other in check, the black market would have the opportunity to expand wantonly. Ban City, which was filled with all sorts of religious sects, T-City, which was known as the paradise for maritime explorers, and Luo City, which was a tax haven, were all in such a situation. And in Xia City, where the 3 heavyweights were keeping watch, and Professor Luo had appeared out of nowhere, the Wild Inn was destined to only be a single auxiliary function of selling information and transferring supplies. It could only help a limited number of people become rich. On the level of benefits, as soon as the word limited appeared, the foot of the inn would often be smeared with deathly white brains. The Wild Inn had already changed owners 7 times in recent years. The most recent one was the Bays Massacre, that Zhong Ming spoke of. It happened not too long ago at the end of last year. It was closely related to the 2 out of 1,000 young miss incident that caused the inner world to become restless. It could be considered to be related to Luo Nan to a certain extent. Cat Eyes recalled her mission when she thought of Luo Nan. She casually pushed the tray and the flexible screen in front of Zhong Ming. Taking care of the business isn't a problem. Now is the time to use you guys. I've already deducted 10 points. Now it's up to you. Yes. Sister Cat will definitely give me a chance to make up for it. Zhong Ming's business attributes were off the charts. He picked up the flexible screen and gave it a few glances. Then he moved to open up the database, preparing to change the information entry. Cat Eyes was a particular person. She understood the order of arrival. She knocked on the bar counter. Mr. Bai is still over there. It's nothing. I'm just helping Blackheart Salt pass on a message. I'm bringing a gift or something. It's awkward for my own people, so I won't get involved. Hey, do you think Mr. Bai can't hear you? Cat Eyes also knew that the Bai and Zhong families were old friends. They had their own ways of getting along, so she didn't need to worry about it. She nodded and raised her cup towards Mr. Bai from afar. This could be considered complete etiquette. Mr. Bai chuckled and waved his hand in response. He didn't look awkward at all. Zhong Ming had just entered the business not too long ago, but his business abilities were decent. He quickly deleted the useless entries on the flexible screen and added many more. He returned it to Cat Eyes. Actually, your conditions are a bit vague. Everyone knows that it's convenient on the sea, but there are far too many similar activities. The ones I picked were all of a scale and style. But you also know that these kinds of activities usually have qualifications. You can't participate just because you want to. Cat Eyes grunted twice and looked at the introduction seriously. Zhong Ming snapped his fingers again. This project can't be waived. But seeing that we're old friends, I'll give you another one for free. This is a project that our group of people worked on. The environment, style, and the goods. They're all pretty good. Zhong Ming lowered his voice and moved closer to speak the last sentence.
Chapter 726. Look, it's this ship, the Jade Light. It's basically confirmed to set sail from Ban City next month. It will cross the Pacific Ocean and pass through 5 large metropolitan areas before finally arriving at Luo City. During this time, there will be all sorts of large-scale activities, performances, auctions, fights, gambling and everything else. Zhong Miao projected an aerial photo of a large cruise ship, the Jade Light, a humpback whale-class mothership cruise ship. 450 meters long, 52 meters wide, 22 decks, top speed 40 knots. It can carry over 15,000 people. The interior has its own dock and can park private yachts. The top deck can take off and land medium-sized fixed-wing aircraft. The cost is close to 3 billion. This was originally Wang Yu's private property, but it was recently donated to the Jade Inspection Society to be used as an event venue. Cat Eye's eyelids twitched when she heard the word aircraft. She cast her gaze towards the aerial photo. She circled around the luxurious business jet parked on the top deck. She really wanted to ask if there were any other angles, but in the end she asked about another matter. Wang Yu? Jade Inspection Society? Hee, this is a small organization established by a group of us. It's similar to the Brotherhood. Look, my name, Yu, means beautiful jade, right? And Wang Yu, his name is the same. It's probably a coincidence. Everyone came together and hit it off. You and Wang Yu? Can you reach them? Don't say that Cat Eyes look down on others. Wang Yu's name wasn't special, but there was probably only one Wang Yu in the world who could casually donate a luxury cruise ship worth 2 billion. She was the chairman of Jadeite Investment, one of the largest private shareholders of Quantum Corporation, and possibly the most powerful youth in the world. Don't even talk about Zhong Miao. Even Zhong Miao's father, a veteran B-rank powerhouse and a combat master, Zhong Miao, was an unreachable distance away from her. Hey you. Don't hit my face when you hit me. Zhong Miao's tone was raised at first, then suppressed. In the end, he could only respond with a mischievous smile. I can't be mentioned in the same breath as Wang Yu, but it's not like the difference between heaven and earth. Look, Blackheart Salt is her girlfriend. I grew up wearing the same pants as her, so why can't I reach her? Ha! Zhong Ji also realized that he had made a slip of the tongue. He didn't even dare to turn around to look at Mr. White's old face. He smiled awkwardly and sped up. I have a lot of information here. I'll send you the event app. There will be real-time updates about the performances and the items to be auctioned. You can take a look. I have something to do, so I'll be leaving first. Saying this, Zhong Yun hurriedly went to hide. Mr. White didn't kill him on the spot, and Cat Eyes didn't care about the fate of the surnamed Zhong at all. She just sat quietly in front of the bar, waiting for the relevant information to be sent to her. She looked through it one by one. This was especially so for the pictures of the Emerald Light. After 5 minutes of picking and choosing, she finally found one that felt most similar to the Emerald Light among the hundreds of pictures. After making some adjustments, she formed a silhouette effect and pieced it together with the psychic picture in her hand. After a simple zooming process, the silhouette that was converted from a real-life photo successfully replaced the relatively blurry shadow of the cruise on the psychic map. It was almost perfect. This result, Cat Eyes didn't hesitate at all. She sent Luo Nan the comparison diagram and the relevant information regarding the Jadeite Light to Luo Nan. Mission complete. She did it in a straightforward and efficient manner. It was simply like the originally expensive cup of blood energy that was now free. She drank the expensive drink that was worth 2 honor points in a single gulp. The warm flow of nourishing energy entered her throat, and great waves surged from the bottom of her heart. Why was it so simple? Why was it so coincidental? Cat Eyes had long felt that Luo Nan's decision to hand this matter over to her was a rather strange one. In terms of intelligence-gathering ability, even if Cat Eyes were to fly a plane, she still wouldn't be able to catch up to He Yuan, who specialized in her field and controlled a large number of channels. What did it mean that it was inconvenient to involve the black market? This sort of reason was completely untenable when she thought about it in detail. Did the sources of intelligence still have to be legal and formal? But the truth was that Luo Nan had forcefully assigned the mission to her. He wanted her to go to the black market to search for clues. Not long after she arrived at the Wild Inn, she bumped into Zhong Yun, an old acquaintance. Zhong Yun just so happened to give her accurate information. Zhong Yun certainly didn't know anything about the cause and effect of the entire matter. He just acted according to his usual temperament and personality. He embodied the friendship of a businessman, nothing more. The series of circumstances in the Wild Inn completely conformed to the chain of logic at the time. There was nothing awkward about it at all. but as she replayed the events in her mind, Cat Eyes felt as if she was on an interior stage called the Wild Inn. She and everyone present had performed a play called Intelligence Gathering together. Every single person on the stage was a movie king with off-the-charts acting skills. The entire play was completed in a single breath. It flowed down in a continuous stream. Not a single trace of a performance could be seen. Perhaps she had drunk too much blood energy. She felt a bit intoxicated. Cat Eyes was in a daze for a time. She couldn't differentiate between reality and illusion. She subconsciously supported herself on the bar counter and stood up. She prepared to walk out. It was at this moment that a slight stimulation from the outside world caused her to fiercely wake up. She turned her head to look and just happened to meet Mr. Bai's puzzled gaze. "Oh, Cat Eyes, you're going back just like that?" Cat Eyes stood still. In the end, the experiences of last night, now, and even the recent period of time had caused her some trouble. It was impossible for her to go see a psychiatrist. However, when she coincidentally met an expert in a related field, the preset obstacles were naturally erased. She hesitated for a moment before walking over to the private room. "Mr. Bai, are you looking for someone to drink a few cups with?" Mr. Bai cheerfully extended his hand and gestured for Cat Eyes to sit. Come. We're all drinkers. A few cups is just right. You're not like that little bastard Zhong Yun. He's slippery to the point where he can't even touch his hands. I'm afraid the old Zhong died with everlasting regret." Cat Eyes found a waiter and ordered 2 bottles of wine. She poured Mr. Bai's wine, but as she was pouring the wine, she heard Mr. Bai sigh. "Big brother, don't laugh at second brother. There's still someone who died with everlasting regret." Clearly Mr. Bai was talking about his own daughter, Bai Xinyan, who worked for Quantum Corporation and held a high position. Bai Xinyan was a very complicated woman. She had traveled tens of thousands of miles to treat Luonan. Their relationship was quite good for a time, but she was also the biggest driving force behind the 2000ths of a girl incident. It was just a semi-rumor, but it set off an enormous storm. It nearly caused the power balance of the inner world to collapse. Cat Eyes and Bai Xinyan's friendship was mediocre, so there was no need for her to make any comments. Mr. Bai also did not want to complain to her. He smiled and rubbed against the hot topic. "I don't see you breathing a sigh of relief after the DNA report came out. It's not easy to clear up the misunderstanding." He was clearly talking about Luonan's paternity test. The smile on Cat Eye's lips was a bit cold and cynical. Actually, she had always believed that Luonan's actions were far more vile than people could imagine for a woman who possessed an independent spirit. However, she was the one who courted death first. Luonan's subjective lack of intent caused the entire matter to become vague and unclear. The current problem was the current Luonan, a powerful person who could wander in and out and control the will of others? Was he really still a muddled youth? Cat Eyes could not see it. Misunderstandings are very normal. Even if you look at the child with your own eyes, sometimes you can't even feel that it's your own flesh and blood. Let alone outsiders who are completely unaware. Mr. Bai drank a large mouthful of chicken soup for the soul, but the one who drank the most was still himself. At the same time he poured mouthful after mouthful of the soup into his mouth. It made his figure seem all the more stooped and even pitiful. Cat Eyes did not go along with him. She did not console him. She just drank cup after cup with Mr. Bai. She waited until the little old man's mood had calmed down a bit before she said, "Mr. Bai, I want to ask for guidance. What in the world is the psychic technique?" Mr. Bai went, "Oh," and suddenly raised his head. His mind was clearly roused. Luonan is trying to psychic again? He's drawing right? What's the situation? Do you have any works of art on hand? Cat Eyes raised her cup. She smiled and swayed, but she did not say anything. Mr. Bai reacted. She had just asked one question and he had thrown back 4 questions in a row. This was not proper. He chuckled in amusement and poured himself another cup. This could be considered an apology. "Your boss Luo is a first-rate psychic in Xia City. You should go ask him this question." "Alright. Is he still saying that his psychic technique is just a random drawing, that he's just making up the numbers?" Cat Eyes was surprised. She immediately sneered, "This is taking advantage of him and then flaunting it. This has always been his style." Mr. Bai slapped the table and laughed out loud. This time he temporarily forgot about his vexed matters. He was in high spirits as he said, "That's right. When he said these words back then I wanted to slap him. Look at his battle achievements and psychic effects. Even old Yu has times where he makes mistakes. How much is his success rate? 100%. Oh, You psychics have been having quite a few gatherings these past few months. It's always been like this. It's just that Boss Luo didn't participate in the past and you didn't care, so you didn't pay attention. Speaking of psychics in Xia City, most of us have been affected by Old Yu's magnetization. Our psychic senses and judgments are quite decent. We have quite a bit of talent in psychic techniques. Oh my. Counting from Old Yu, me, Gao Tianshi, and Horn Demon for consecutive B-rank psychics are psychics. Oh, Her Majesty Empress Wu has a divine and heavenly disposition, so she can't be counted. Luo Nan is the first person who hasn't been affected by Old Yu. Also, the bamboo pole can only be considered broken when it comes to him. Mr. Bai checked the name list and commented one by one. Here Old Yu is proficient in divination techniques. The tall and fierce Gao Tianshi borrows the self-hypnosis techniques of the ancient religious system. He invites the gods to possess his body. Horned Demon relies purely on his natural endowments. He plays too evil, so let's not talk about it for now. As for me, I engage in dreaming techniques on the mental plane. I construct a dreamland. Hey. Who do you think your boss Luo pays more attention to when it comes to communication? Cat Eyes didn't even need to guess. She saw the smile lines at the corner of Mr. Bai's eyes and lips. She raised her cup and toasted him. There's no need to say more about the obvious. Cheers. Mr. Bai laughed happily. Yeah, it's the two of us who get along the most. Horned Demon hasn't met him face to face, so there's no need to talk about it. Old Yu's divination technique requires a deep accumulation of traditional culture. There's also a talent requirement in the area of algebra. We aren't cut out for that. Gao Tianxi's side is pretty much the same. He's a god and he doesn't really suit his taste. Only my side picks materials on the mental plane. I also have a set of suitable special logic. I have materials and methods. Then I can design a building, arrange a labyrinth trap, put people inside, guide them, tempt them, and dig out deeper information. I can predict a more accurate possibility. Isn't it quite simple and clear? That's why we can discuss it the most. Chapter 727. Mr. Bai's description doesn't break away from the habits of a medical worker. His description is rigorous and conservative. He basically won't go overboard. But when it comes to dreams, emotions, desires, and instincts, the route is a guided transformation from false to real. Making dreams come true is the essence of the art of telepathy. Luo Nan made an evaluation in a proud manner. Unfortunately, he could only say it in his mind. Right now he sat upright in the classroom. There was a ceremonial feeling of the final lesson. The school's courteous, helpless, and resolute suggestion and the results of the family meeting had basically decided that Luo Nan's 96 to 97 school year would end early. Right now it was just a matter of going through the motions. As for when he would return to school to continue his studies, there was still no definite date. Luo Nan's appearance in the classroom was completely meaningless in terms of his studies. He just came to hide in peace. The omnipresent gossip was already very annoying. There was also the ridicule from the group of friends and relatives. Though they didn't have any evil intentions, it wasn't good for his concentration. Right now he sat in the classroom. He automatically blocked out the teacher's lecture and the surrounding noise. He received the information from Cat Eyes and carefully reviewed it. Luo Nan didn't mind Cat Eyes chatting with Mr. Bai and talking about him behind his back. At most he would just spit out a mouthful. He knew that Cat Eyes had been quite distressed recently. If she had asked him directly, he wouldn't have been stingy in explaining it. But if she didn't come looking for him, he couldn't force himself to say, "I tormented you last night because of OXX. There's no problem. Just relax and it'll be fine." Oh, he really did feel a bit guilty when he thought about it this way. Luo Nan coughed and took a deep breath. He adjusted his sitting posture and focused his attention back on the projected work area. The information sent over by Cat Eyes, especially the information related to the jadeite light, met Luo Nan's expectations. Cat Eyes had perfectly fulfilled the role of a die. Within the hazy background, she had highlighted a significant factor. Luo Nan's judgment was the same as Cat Eyes. He also believed that the jadeite light cruise ship was extremely compatible with the fuzzy outline he had drawn on the psychic diagram. And he went one step further than Cat Eyes. His body was in Xia City, but his mind had already traveled over 1,000 kilometers. He crossed the open sea and arrived at the large marine metropolis located on the archipelago. Just as the information indicated, the Jade Light was docked at the cruise terminal in Ban City, carrying out intensive preparations for the voyage. At this time, There were a total of 4,279 staff members on the cruise ship. The tourists near the docks, the factories, and so on within 20 square kilometers had about 100,000 people. Luo Nan's mental sensing network was supported by concentrated water molecules. It adhered to the bodies of over 100,000 people. Luo Nan relied on the face recognition algorithms of the virtual brain system to sift through them in a short few minutes. The result was not satisfactory. The Shilua order's female officiant was not detected. Should I say as expected? Luo Nan maintained an extremely good state of mind. He wasn't dispirited or impatient. After determining that it would be very difficult to make a breakthrough, he temporarily shelved his screening work and returned to the materials. He went through them page by page to see if he could find a new trigger point for inspiration. Wu Jun's matter isn't that urgent. There's still enough time to deal with it. Moreover, in this matter, my thinking and methods are not wrong. Luo Nan reviewed the materials and scrutinized his own methods. He was quite confident in his final conclusion. Luo Nan had lived a relatively peaceful life over the past few months. Aside from the incident he caused in Spring City 2 days ago and the occasional mental wandering that caused trouble for the explorers who were searching for a needle in a haystack, he basically did not have any other major operations. No one was blind enough to provoke him. Therefore, these 4 long months of peace were a period of sedimentation for Luo Nan. It allowed Luo Nan to truly make up for his most lacking extraordinary theoretical foundation. There was the virtual brain system that came from an unknown civilization. It was mature, profound, complex, and rigorous in its configuration and dynamo core design rules. There was also the crystallization of various theories that were still in its early stages on Earth. They were mainly guesses based on experience, but there was no lack of resplendent brilliance. In this way, Luo Nan's behavior and judgment erased many elements of imagination, conjecture, and gambling. His goals became clearer, his methods became more concise, and his self-confidence rose with the tide. The only unpredictable factor in the drawing process of the psychic diagram was the influence of the Abyss Sun disk. Once he accepted it, Luo Nan didn't believe that there would be any flaws in the other links. I'll use the mental sensing network that covers the entire world to search the environment Wu Jun has lived in and the people she has influenced. I'll search for traces of that special magnetization. I'll also perfectly avoid powerful extraordinary species people who might cause a backlash. Then I'll use the observation and special intuition tempered from my speed writing practice to extract concise feedback from the vast background information. This is a search and judgment. It's an evaluation and calculation. At the same time, it's an associative creation. This is my forte. Luo Nan's mental senses and the acuity of his psionic senses went without saying. They were top-notch in the world. At the same time, he controlled the wraith sign, allowing him to probe into the depths of a person's emotions at any time. This was the best tool to search for materials. And the sketching technique he practiced since he was young was ingeniously combined with his senses and psionic senses. It formed a logical chain of observation, discovery, capture, reproduction, and reconstruction. The combination of the two formed the core cornerstone of the living starry sky and the large production line of the closed system. This was the fundamental method he used to construct his system. Of course, he had confidence. He had to have confidence. Perhaps there were many people in this world whose logical thinking and associative imagination abilities were more powerful than Luo Nan's. There were also many people whose sketching techniques could crush Luo Nan into dregs. However, they would never be able to possess the breadth and depth of perception that Luo Nan possessed. They would never be able to possess the keen grasp of the laws of extraordinary power and the flow of emotions, instincts, and desires that were built upon the dual systems of the virtual brain and the wraith sign. This was the disparity that was essentially insurmountable. This disparity determined whether a sketch was a display of pure artistry or a miraculous display of insight and foresight. Plus, there was the Abyss Sun wheel. Under the boundless and pervasive light, the emotions and desires of people were like bacteria under a microscope. They were magnified and dancing in an exaggerated manner, full of sensitivity and desire to express themselves. Why did Luo Nan favor the dream-inducing technique so much? It was because the dream-inducing technique was the only method Luo Nan had up until now aside from the similarity in basic concepts. He could partially explain and practice the wraith sign system, receive, and utilize the power of the Abyss Sun wheel. Of course, the influence of the Abyss Sun wheel was like an enormous, turbulent wave. It felt good to have the wind and the current go smoothly, but it would overshoot if one wasn't careful. The psychic technique can retrace the past. It can foresee the future. The dream-inducing technique plus the Abyss Sun Wheel, along with my original creative intent, are all aimed at foresight. But right now the driving force is hard to control, and the information I extract and associate is far too jumpy. I can't find Wu Jun right now. Excluding the possibility of the psychic failing, it's more likely that this matter hasn't happened yet. Luonan wrote and drew in the virtual work area, arranging the information he had gathered. He also began to interpret the results of his own psychic technique. If this is the case, then there are quite a few missing links that need to be filled in before the scene of foresight. Oh, I also need to pay attention to the problem of the psychic main body. Wu Jun's whereabouts is a problem I urgently want to know. It is related to my personal interests. Therefore, the construction of the dream-inducing world and the rules of its operation revolve around me. The results obtained through psychic communication and divination must be established on the foundation of my deep participation. In this way, the jadeite light isn't simply a place where Wu Jun will appear. It's the intersection point between me and Wu Jun. I can come into contact with the jadeite light at any time, but the intensity of observation shouldn't be enough. Then do I need to personally go there? The psychic technique isn't tampering with the world line. Instead, it's a kind of observation, grasp, and conjecture of the natural development trend. In other words, if things continue to develop according to normal circumstances, I might have a higher chance of boarding the jadeite light and meeting up with Wu Jun there. 15 minutes ago, the concept of the ultra-luxurious giant ship, the jadeite light, didn't exist within Luonan's knowledge. However, the current location of this giant ship was the cruise ship dock of Ban City. Ban City was a place Luonan had to go to in the next few days. He needed to make advance arrangements for the purge of the cloud world. He also needed to use the resources of the Blood Flame Order over there to practice and master the new abilities brought about by the biochemical reactor. In particular, he needed to adapt to the short yet powerful explosive period of the weak electromagnetic muscle structure. The situation seemed to have become a bit clearer. But how could he take another step forward? He never had any plans to ride a cruise ship. He didn't even have one now. Who could hold a gun to his head and force him onto the ship? Luonan went in circles for the following period of time, but he didn't get any results. Right when he was feeling helpless, the hexier vibrated slightly. Someone was looking for him. Luonan raised his eyebrows when he saw the contact. Oh my, this is a broken pot that's broken. He's taking the initiative to deliver his head. The person who sent the communication request was none other than a certain person who had gotten into trouble by mistakenly believing in Big Mouth. Luonan let out a breath and directly issued an ultimatum after connecting. Bro Octopus, let's meet in the fighting arena tomorrow. We'll settle our grudges in a single fight. I guarantee I won't kill you. Can I talk about proper business? My proper business has become a world-class tidbit. Why don't you explain it to me? Cough, a professional explanation is definitely no problem for me. According to the YSTR gene locus, you and the other person definitely don't belong to the same paternal line. You need to know that I've even collected a sample from your grandfather. I've even called up the SCA database for your father's genetic records. I can confirm that there isn't even a 1 in 10,000 chance. This is good news, right? Hee hee. Luonan could only respond in this manner. Frankly speaking, Luonan let out a sigh of relief in his heart with this kind of result. Even though he didn't have any so-called expectations towards a certain person, it wasn't a bad thing to be able to be a bit less disgusting. Also, he could use a more natural attitude to face polio. This was undoubtedly a good thing. Right. This was a good thing. But he still wanted to beat that bastard octopus to death. Octopus laughed dryly a few more times, but he lacked the strength to continue. He simply sent a picture over. The picture was automatically projected onto his retina in the communication state. It should be an automatic photo. The items on the picture were all crooked, but fortunately the general appearance could be seen. The surface of the thing was wrapped in leather. The pages of paper were folded together in the middle, and they were connected by neatly arranged metal rings. It looked square and heavy, and the whole thing was a bit fluffy. Yes, this was an old notebook. It was an item that had practically been eliminated in the current era. However, the one in the picture clearly fully realized its value. Looking at the stains on the edges, it should be more or less filled with words. Rational thoughts flowed to this point. Only then did the emotional response suddenly surge forth. It was like liquid nitrogen leaking out of control. It instantly froze Luonan's expression. He was far too familiar with this form and appearance. In fact, he had one right by his side. Chapter 728. From the Pingjiang district in the southwest of Xia City to the Lilan district in the northeast, there was a large diagonal that ran through the entire city. Normally, this traffic line was known for being busy and congested. Luo Nan rushed out of the classroom. He grabbed a flying beetle before most people got off work and hurried over to the Shangding building. The road conditions were much better than normal at this time, but Luo Nan only felt that it was slow. At this moment he especially missed the days when Qin Yikuan and God accompanied him, especially the latter's flying car. It was fast and stable and it could reach the destination in one stop. It was much better than the metal worms that were circling between the buildings. Luo Nan sat in the car. He was clearly going in a straight line, but he had to make turns. It was hard for Luo Nan to not be impatient. Luckily, Octopus was always online chatting with him. They're going through the reward channel. They even sent photos and some photocopies. There's no need to doubt the authenticity. It's just that they don't think highly of my title as an agent, so they want you to personally negotiate with them. Oh. Thank you, bro Octopus. At this very moment, the bit of resentment regarding the paternity test had long since been tossed beyond the highest heavens. Luo Nan only had gratitude towards Octopus. Deep gratitude. The reward channel, the two spoke of, was the mission reward area on the official website of the Ability User Society. It was the only official channel for ability users, their various powers and organizations to realize employment. Luo Nan's grandfather's notebook was hung here to accept the reward. It was Octopus's doing. It happened at the end of September last year. At the time, Luo Nan had just finished his first mission after joining the Xia City branch. He went to the sanatorium to visit his grandfather and unexpectedly reunited with Octopus, who he had cooperated with on the mission. Luo Nan admired Octopus's ability to concoct drugs. Octopus, on the other hand, was very interested in Luo Yuandao's nerve-strengthening drug formula and the corresponding theory in Luo Yuandao's notebook. The two reached an agreement. Octopus would help Luo Nan concoct the drug, and Luo Nan would authorize Octopus to make a rubbing of the notebook for in-depth research. Later, Luo Nan rapidly broke through the limits of the self-format. Drugs and whatnot were no longer of use to him. Octopus kept on studying Luo Yuandao's notebook and published many papers one after another. He could be considered the first person to open the door for formatting theory. Both sides of the transaction were interesting people. Luo Nan's drug concoction had been set aside, but he believed that Octopus's research on his grandfather's notebook provided solid proof for the value of formatting theory, so he was very satisfied. As for Octopus, the drug concoction conditions he had originally agreed to were now useless, but he didn't want to take advantage of Luo Nan. So he paid out of his own pocket to rent a long-term advertising spot in headquarters' official bounty area, offering a bounty for the whereabouts of Luo Yuandao's notebook. Octopus had mentioned this matter to Luo Nan before, but Luo Nan had forgotten about this matter after half a year had passed until today. Compared to the restless Luo Nan who had heard the good news, Octopus, who had originally intended to use this to make up for his crimes, had regained his rationality earlier. He fiercely gave Luo Nan a heads up. Since the other side has proposed negotiations, they certainly won't be satisfied with the bounty on the list. Right now your status and value are different. The name, formatting theory, has undergone an earth-shattering change compared to before. To be honest, the price hanging on it doesn't match. We have to be prepared for the price to be raised. Yes, I know. Hey, you're clearly going to get ripped off if you negotiate in this state. Don't forget, this is just one of the hundreds and thousands of notebooks your grandfather has. If the first standard is raised too high, then the rest will really explode. No matter how good your credit rating is, it won't be able to fill this bottomless pit. Yes, I know. Fine. Let's find external help. Octopus looked at Luo Nan's dishonest appearance and felt despair. He was a young man. Once his emotions got to his head, he would certainly disregard the consequences. He knew that he wasn't a negotiation expert, and he wasn't someone who could persuade Luo Nan. He could only place his thoughts on someone else. If there's something, find the secretary. I'll ask Vice President He and have her come over to help you negotiate. Yes, I understand. No matter what happened, Luo Nan, who was burning with anxiety, arrived at the Shangding building half an hour later. He headed straight for He Yuan's office upstairs. He Yuan and Octopus were already waiting. The two were in the middle of a discussion about the identity of the person receiving the bounty. He Yuan was very concerned about this point. Since we're going to negotiate face-to-face, why do we need to remain anonymous in advance? Maybe it's a habitual setting. I'm also used to being anonymous when I shop online. He intentionally changed the subject when you asked him just now. Could it be an acquaintance? An enemy? Octopus felt that he was a good person and didn't have many enemies. He naturally turned his gaze to Luonan, who had just pushed open the door and entered. Right now Luonan's mind was filled with notes and notes. He forced a smile at the two and said, "You'll know when you see him. Brother Octopus, I'll trouble you to contact him. We'll talk face to face." "That's fine. But you're just going to talk like this. Shouldn't you be sitting in a boss chair, separated by an office desk, and have a secretary standing next to you or something? You're wearing a school uniform." Luonan knew that Octopus was purposefully teasing him, but he still couldn't help but grin. His mood was a bit more relaxed. "Yeah. I hope they'll give me a discount on account that I'm a poor student." He nodded to He Yuan as he spoke. "Sister Yuan, I'll have to trouble you again today. It's what I should do." He Yuan responded with a smile. Today He Yuan was still dressed in formal business attire. Her hair was tied up, and she wore a simple and generous white shirt on her upper body. Her lower body wore dark-colored trousers paired with heels of the same color. The color was low in saturation, but at the same time she still looked capable and refreshing. She looked a bit more gentle than usual. Needless to say, this kind of makeup, her slightly drooping cheeks, her solemn and dignified aura, and she quietly stood slightly behind Luonan. She really did have the style of a first-class secretary. It was just that the school uniform of a certain someone in front of her was too out of character. "I'll be in charge of communication. You'll be in charge of showing your face. Secretary, he will be in charge of negotiating the price. The division of labor is clear. We can't interfere with each other, especially when negotiating the price. Do you understand?" The three people stood in front of the office desk. Octopus opened up the communication function of the official bounty channel. Since this wasn't an instant communication, Octopus didn't expect Luonan to pick up immediately. He seized this time to brainwash Luonan with high intensity. Luonan let out a breath and was just about to respond when he saw the projection in front of him open automatically. It showed that Luonan had received the message and had agreed to make a video call. "Ah, he's here." The gazes of the three people focused on the projection area at the same time. First, a deep blue sky appeared over there. There seemed to be the whistling sound of the wind. The camera here shook endlessly. A face that seemed to be male entered and exited the image several times. It was only after a few adjustments that it finally stabilized. "Oh, Luonan, boss Luo. I see the real person. It really was a male." He spoke in a slightly resounding tone and spoke in a familiar manner. He felt like a rather extroverted person. Truth be told, this person's appearance was a bit simple and clumsy. His forehead was quite a bit wider than an ordinary person's. His eye sockets were deep, making his forehead look like a deformed bulge. It was quite eye-catching. Luonan subconsciously examined him. "Oh, why does he look a bit familiar? Have I seen him somewhere before?" A thought suddenly sprouted in his mind. Before he could react, he heard Octopus groan to the side, "Crap." The person in front of him had already cracked a smile at this time. He laughed happily. "This is the first time we've met. But you should have heard of me before. I'm a horned demon." Luonan was stupefied when he suddenly heard this title. That's right. He really had heard of this name before. Just an hour ago, Mr. Bai was drinking and discussing heroes. He had even mentioned this person. The horned demon was the only one Luonan had never seen out of the several veteran B-rank psychic types in Xia City. Hold on. They were from the same branch. This should be a good thing. Why did Octopus say crap? Right when Luonan was confused, the horned demon's line of sight had already shifted. It streaked across Octopus's face and finally stopped at He Yuan. His long and narrow eyes, which appeared especially bright and clear, froze. Then a smile blossomed on his face as his entire face revolved around these eyes. "Oh, look what I see. A beautiful woman. A woman." The horned demon's tone became even more resounding, so much so that there were signs of his voice breaking. He was like a lousy opera singer who began his performance in front of the camera. "I don't know how to address this lady? Wait a moment. Let me guess. I don't know anyone from the branch, but there's such a stylish beauty. Don't tell me she's the legendary vice president of the Burners, someone's professional secretary, Mrs. He Yuan?" Wasn't his performance a bit too exaggerated? Luonan's brows subconsciously wrinkled, and the horned demon's face abruptly disappeared from the camera in the next second. This time the camera followed up in a timely manner. It scouted down and captured the figure of the horned demon. The camera only reflected the back of the horned demon. This was because the horned demon's knees and hands had fallen to the ground, ignoring the filthy dust and mud. His head heavily smashed onto the countless wrinkles of the red earth wasteland. At the same time he loudly shouted, "Grandma Yuan, I'm sorry." Luonan was stupefied, but Yuan reacted faster as the person directly involved. She whispered in his ear, "I'm going to hide for a bit." Then she flashed out of the door. On the other side of the camera, the horned demon straightened his upper body. He raised his hands in an exaggerated manner before knocking them down again. He was still shouting, "Grandma Yuan, I'm sorry. Grandma Yuan, I'm sorry." After shouting 3 times and kowtowing 3 times, the horned demon crawled up from the ground. He patted off the dust and mud as if nothing had happened. Done. What's going on? Luonan was really confused. No matter how much he imagined, no matter how detailed, it was impossible for him to think of this situation. Octopus held his forehead with his hand, covering half of his face. He lowered his voice and said, "This is the reason why the horned demon lingered in the wilderness." Back then, he suffered a crushing defeat against Her Majesty Empress Wu. The agreement he accepted was that he would kneel down and shout, "Grandma, I'm sorry," 3 times whenever he meets a woman within 3 years. Only he could endure this kind of condition. Her Majesty Empress Wu. Right now it's not related to Empress Wu, right? On the other side of the projection, the horned demon wiped his forehead in passing, but it made the mud even clearer. He didn't care. At the very least this was what he said, "Right now it's about the bounty. You guys only put up 10 points. This is too insincere. With Boss Luo's current status, it shouldn't be a problem to multiply it by 100, right? 1,000 points? Why don't you just rob a bank?" Octopus slammed the table. "You think selling you is worth 1,000 points?" The horned demon simply didn't respond to Octopus's words. He extended 3 fingers and shook them in front of the camera. Also, the 3 kowtows before were solid enough. "Isn't it interesting to watch?" That's not free. 3 times. Raise it by 3 times and this notebook will be yours. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.